The whole room was buzzing about the Medine family's daughter's divorce. The socialites were practically drooling over the fact that a divorced woman wanted to raise her son solo. They stared into her confident eyes, whispering about what a naive little fool she was. The gossips instantly shut their traps when she gave them the stink eye. Still, the girl herself handled every jab with grace. She hugged her son tight and told everyone to chill out. There was nothing to worry about. Smiling, she squeezed her son close and said that he had a mom, and that was enough. Just a few months ago, she wouldn't have had this kind of confidence. That day, she woke up and realized she was in a completely different body. From then on, she was stuck in the body of the heroine from a novel called Serenade of Ruin. In the novel, Sophia Grandcourt used her son's powers to kick off a full-blown civil war. In the end, the hero offed her for trying to mess with the Holy Maiden's abilities. Sophia just couldn't stomach the idea of such a brutal fate. That thought tore her up inside, body and soul, until a maid walked into the room. She looked at the kid, who was now her son, and remembered his name. The maid froze when this weird little dude called her Mommy. The next second, she clutched her heart, like she was totally under the kid's spell. She rushed to give little Adam a warm, loving hug. Looks like her sudden, touchy-feely act caught the maid totally off guard. Before she could even say a word, Sophia's wicked mother-in-law burst into the room. Sophia noticed Adam practically jumped out of his skin when he saw this woman. Standing before them was Duchess Catherine Grandcourt, and she looked like a real piece of work. Her family was one of the most famous ducal houses, steeped in old traditions. In the novel, Sophia was completely obsessed with that family's heir, Tristan. Giving in to those crazy feelings, she rushed into marrying him. She was so thrilled to be with him, she was totally blind to his flaws. But despite that infatuation, her marital bliss didn't last long. The second she gave birth to their kid, he went cold on her and started acting like a jerk. Soon, he was totally disgusted by her and wouldn't give her the time of day. And on top of that, her mother-in-law treated her like dirt, day in and day out. Catherine acted like she saw her as competition for her son's affection. Soon, Sophia's desire for even a little attention from her husband morphed into a full-blown obsession. Her mother-in-law basically forced her to bury any feelings she had for her husband. Crushed by all this crap, Sophia started down a dark path. After realizing all this, she wasn't going to let them treat her or her son like that anymore. Even when they ate together, Sophia and Adam were always glued to each other's side. Adam accidentally knocked over a glass of water, and it shattered. Catherine immediately ripped into the kid, saying he should know how to eat properly at 3 years old. She turned to Sophie and said she was slacking on raising her kid right. Tristan backed his mom up, saying Sophie needed to spend more time on Adam's upbringing. Catherine sighed, exhausted, and started to lay out what was at stake for their duchy. Sophia used to just swallow all the snide remarks the family made about Adam. She couldn't take it anymore and snapped that Tristan was already 28 and still hadn't grown up. It was so out of character that Tristan and Catherine couldn't believe what they were hearing. Sophie asked Catherine if she also hadn't spent enough time on his upbringing. Catherine frowned, lost in thought, and asked what she was even talking about. Sophie threw her hands up, all business, and said it was obvious to everyone. She pointed out how her son wasn't fulfilling his duties as head of the family, and instead blew all the money on booze and partying. He froze when she said he was stepping out on her with women beneath his station. Tristan raised a hand in appeasement and told her not to jump to conclusions. Sophie just dropped that he's been using his position to get women into bed. Tristan froze solid when she said he wasn't even a real man. She went on to say that a parent should be a role model for their kid. His mom gritted her teeth and asked if she was ready to face the music for saying all that. Sophie held out her hand to the butler and said she was ready for whatever came next. Then bam! She triumphantly flashed the divorce papers. She shoved them at her so-called family and said she was done with them, finished. She grabbed her son's hand while her enemies were shaking in their boots from her words. Without another word, she hauled Adam out of the room as fast as she could. As a parting shot, she said they could have shown Adam more love if they had any to give. The stepmom thought she was stuck, but Sophie was determined to go back to her family. The second she said that, her mother-in-law and ex-husband froze up, scared stiff. Right after that, Sophie grabbed her packed bags and just took off. She hugged Adam, realizing that anyone could turn sour in that kind of environment. The girl smiled, knowing there was no point in holding on to that marriage, mostly because her family was loaded, seriously rich. That's exactly why she decided to cash in on those perks and bail. About an hour later, the girl finally pulled up to her parents' place. She was surprised when the butler suggested she use the back entrance. Sophie figured they were having a party and wanted to make a grand entrance. With a confident grin, she threw open the doors to her family's mansion. The jaws of every aristocrat in the place practically hit the floor when they saw her. Sophie was betting her dad wouldn't chew her out in front of all these people. She froze in the middle of the hallway, quickly scanning every face in the crowd. Then, smiling, she pulled Adam close and announced that she was back. The girl stood there, waiting for her father to say something. Anything. Duke Olivier Medin glared at his headstrong daughter, looking none too pleased. The Medin family started as just a county, but their contributions to the kingdom boosted their status. The old man shot her an icy look and demanded to know what she was doing there. Looking at him, she couldn't help but remember her days hustling as a sales rep. She had to face the clients, pushing the company's products. Her job was a real pressure cooker, since she was also in charge of the newbies. The company director just turned a blind eye to how much she was carrying. Because of that, she was the only one burning the midnight oil, working overtime till all hours. They paid her peanuts, but she was scared to give up the gig. She knew her folks couldn't bail her out financially. Every night, the girl felt down, dreaming of making more dough. Then one of those days, she heard some news that hit her like a ton of bricks. The new guy ticked off a major client, and the company lost a business partner. Everyone blamed her for the screw-up, even though it wasn't even her fault. Even the head honcho, who's always dumping extra crap on her, chewed her out. So just like that, she lost the job she'd been busting her butt for. She could barely drag herself along, her head swimming with how unfair it all was. All these months, she'd been bottling up all the anger and hate inside her. She was so messed up in the head, she didn't even see the step. Tears blurred her vision as she realized she was going down hard. She said goodbye to everything, wishing she could live life on her own terms. Now, it seemed like that very wish was why she was getting a second chance. Right now, she didn't even care about the stink eye her old man was giving her. Adam clung to his mom, wondering if they were about to get the boot or not. Sophie steeled herself and said she'd filed for divorce, for her own sake and her son's. The man looked down, trying to figure out if this was just some kind of game or not. Sophie smiled and asked if they'd take her back into the family. The man choked up, a tear rolling down his cheek, and said he never expected to hear those words from his daughter. He quickly wiped away the tears and looked at his little grandson. The next second, a huge smile spread across his face, and he reached out his arms. Olivier scooped up Adam and started calling himself his grandpa. Sophie never expected her father's anger to turn to kindness so quickly. Her father figured they were tired from the trip and suggested they get some rest. The girl's heart skipped a beat when he told them welcome home. The next morning, Sophie found herself in the bathroom, ready to wash away all the crap from the day before. She checked out the fancy room and was blown away by how loaded her family was. She thanked the maid when she said breakfast was ready. The girl hurried to get herself together and get some food. She was floored by how much amazing food there was. The girl looked around and spotted her mom, looking all chill. Her mom was cool with her not being greeted yesterday, no biggie. She also mentioned that Adam was missing because he was playing with Olivier. The next second, she saw a dude who asked with a smile if she slept well. After that, she joined them and grabbed Adam's hand. Seeing her little boy smile, she felt pure happiness. Her dad said he'd watch the grandson so she could eat breakfast in peace. Sophie was truly grateful for her family's support. Her husband had never shown that kind of affection towards their son before. The girl was touched and sincerely thanked them for their kindness. Looks like her mom was surprised by her daughter's sudden emotions. Tears streamed down her face when she realized how tough things had been for her daughter. She smiled and told Sophie not to worry about a thing anymore. The woman added that they were ready to support their daughter in any way she needed. It seemed like Sophie was finally understanding what parental love really meant. Her mom told her how worried they'd been because she hadn't been visiting. In the novel, Sophia was too ashamed to ask her parents for help. The woman froze, ready to tell her something important. Just as she was about to spill the beans, the maid interrupted them. They decided to put a pin in that conversation for later. Sophie headed to the garden, where she could hang out with Adam. She realized that before she was reborn, she didn't have such a close relationship with her parents. The girl accepted it and decided to live this life to the fullest. Despite the good times now, the story said a bad ending was coming for her. Little did she know, she was about to meet the one who would become her downfall. Sophie was just soaking up the good life, hanging out with her kid. Meanwhile, that dude was grinding hard, putting in work at the training grounds. He was systematically shutting down every attack his skilled opponent threw at him. The guy was sweating bullets under the sun, but he kept coming. In the end, he was taken down, his sword flying out of his hand like a traitor. Lucas was bummed, but his opponent told him to get a grip. The guy smirked and said even at his best, he wouldn't have stood a chance. Lucas knew it, because he was facing Duke Leo Lotharingia himself. Lucas asked if it was true that the owner's daughter had actually returned to the family estate where he was staying. Leo just calmly replied that it was none of his business. Meanwhile, Sophie and Adam stayed in the greenhouse until sunset. The evening was so perfect, they drifted off to sleep without a care in the world. They both agreed that sleep was the best part of the day and stretched. Sophie smiled and suggested they head back to the house before they caught a chill. Once inside, they realized just how massive the estate was. It seemed so huge, you could easily get lost in it. Adam dropped to his knees to pick up a fallen rose. The second he reached for it, he remembered his grandma's punishment. He froze, terrified, remembering how she'd smack him for touching the flowers. Sophie tried to calm him down when she saw him start apologizing. She knew how tough it would be to shake off the damage the Grandcourt family had done. The woman stroked her son's hair and told him to do whatever his heart desired. The boy thought it was so unbelievable, he just couldn't accept it. Sophie decided to clear her head and suggested they explore their new place. The estate was so massive, it had a gallery and a library. It even included a huge walk-in closet, fit for a princess. Sophie glanced at her jewelry and realized this house had everything. Still, she quickly figured out there wasn't much for a little kid to do around here. She could see Adam was bored and decided to come up with something to keep him busy. Meanwhile, Olivier Madane was wondering if Sophia was up to the challenge of raising a kid. Images of Sophia's childhood flashed through his mind. She was always getting into fights with other kids and refused to study. The next thing he knew, she was in the doorway, asking for something. The next day, a ton of carts loaded with boxes showed up at the palace. Sophia stood there, all proud, with a mountain of gifts piled up behind her. Olivier pulled Adam away, saying his mom was out of town on business. Meanwhile, Sophia was confidently bossing all the servants around. In the end, she managed to make her vision a reality. Turns out, the girl was super motivated to build a playground for her son. Even though she was exhausted, she lit up when she saw what she'd accomplished. As soon as they were done, the servant signaled the head of the house. Grandma and Grandpa took Adam by the hands and led him toward the exit. They smiled, holding their breath, waiting for their beloved grandson's reaction. Soon, he saw Sophia smiling. She had prepared a gift for him. Adam's jaw dropped, like he couldn't believe his eyes. He asked, astonished, if this was really his gift. The boy bolted towards the playground, packed with toys. He hugged the toy sword tight and sincerely thanked Sophie. It just reaffirmed her desire to raise him with love and care. They stayed on the playground until sunset. At first, Adam was following his mom, until he spotted something. The second he heard that booming voice, his sword just slipped right out of his hand. Adam froze, scared stiff, seeing a real sword pointed right at him. Sophie immediately jumped in front of her son, shielding him from the stranger. Leo Lotharingia kept staring down at the kid and told him this wasn't a playground. His words hit Adam hard, bringing back a kind of fear he'd forgotten. Sophie felt a surge of anger for her son and decided to stand her ground. She glared at the man, telling him he was way out of line, pointing a sword at a child. Anyone else would have agreed with her, but the knight Leo Lotharingia was a different story. He reached for the toy sword, but then he heard a man calling out. Leo still picked up the sword and offered it to the kid, hilt first. It was only then that Sophie remembered he was a major character in the novel. He was known as the strongest swordsman in the north and commander of the knights. According to the plot, he was supposed to imprison her to fight off the chaos. On top of that, he also ruthlessly banished Adam from the kingdom. Leo Lotharingia was ready to do anything to protect the realm. Sophie was stunned that he suddenly showed up at their place. That's why she decided to gather everyone to find out what was going on. She remembered the Lotharingia Duchy was way up north. Turns out, he'd arrived in the capital a month ago on official business. Sophie found out her father had taken him in and apologized for her disrespect. Leo didn't blame her for what happened and apologized in return. He added sternly that this place wasn't some playground. The servants started making excuses, but Sophie raised her hand and cut them off. She explained she hadn't exactly expected someone to be swinging a sword around in her garden. She met his cold gaze and ordered him to remember he wasn't alone here. Looks like she managed to stand up for herself and shut this guy up. Adam felt the tension and started promising he'd be more careful from now on. Leo commended him for understanding the danger involved. He unexpectedly advised him to never let go of his sword on the battlefield. The guy just laid down the law, all cool, saying he's got someone he needs to protect. Once the kid gave him the thumbs up, he was out of there, leaving the room. Sophie was just standing there, totally thrown, trying to figure out what he meant. Olivier chimed in, saying he could ask him to leave if Sophie felt uncomfortable. She was like, "Whoa, no way! He can stay as long as he needs to." She added that it's their duty to give a home to those who are protecting our country. Sophie's mom was surprised, because she thought her daughter would be against it. She smiled and said they could all get involved in the spring festival together. The girl couldn't believe Leo was going to be around for another whole year. So in the days that followed, she decided to keep a close eye on how he acted. She realized he was handsome, even if he was a total ice king. All the ladies in the mansion were practically drooling over the night. She found it twisted that her parents were sheltering the guy who'd eventually off their daughter. Sophie made up her mind right then and there. She was going to live this life on her own terms. She was stoked when the maid suggested she check out the city. To be honest, both she and Adam were getting seriously bored with the same old scenery. That's exactly why they decided to get ready before the upcoming trip. Sophie grinned when she noticed their outfits matched. So, they grabbed the maid and headed out for some new adventures. They got another chance to check out the capital's awesome architecture. Sophie was ready to buy Adam any toy he wanted. Even though they'd already gotten him a ton, she was totally trying to win him over, telling him his room would be like a real-life castle. Lost in her own world, this mom had no clue she was about to run into someone from her past. She spun around, surprised, when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Before she could even react, the other woman rushed right up to her. She squeezed Sophie so tight, her hat almost popped off. The woman started crying, saying how worried she'd been sick with worry. Sophie was totally lost, because her memory was all messed up. The woman smiled and asked, "Seriously? You already forgot me?" Then she introduced herself as Marianne, Sophie's best friend. Her maid suggested they take their conversations somewhere a little more private. Sophie froze, totally stunned, not understanding how things had gotten to this point. Eventually, they wound up at a cafe, where she decided to reminisce about the good old days. Marianne was being super friendly towards her friend's son. Meanwhile, Sophie was racking her brain trying to remember this girl. She remembered that Marianne had always been on her side. During the civil unrest, she was the only one who tried to talk some sense into Sophie. Ultimately, she got so angry at her rebelliousness that she really did a number on her. Marianne lowered her gaze and said she was really happy with how things turned out for her. The girl teared up, saying they hadn't spoken since Sophie's wedding. She loved her friend so genuinely, it really got to her. Sophie apologized and said she was living back at her parents' place now. Marianne asked, with a sly edge, if she could actually keep her promise. After that meeting, Sophie spent ages trying to remember what she'd even promised. Going through the letters, she saw Marianne asking her to go to a reception with her. The Grand Court family never let her leave the estate before. That's why she never went out in high society or kept in touch with anyone. Because of that, she knew showing up at the reception would start a whole new round of gossip. She didn't really want to be the center of attention, but she decided to go anyway. She asked Adam again if he really wanted to go. The kid stuck out his hand, all confident, and said he was totally going with her. Sophie smiled. Couldn't say no to her little guy. After a while, they finally spotted the decorated spot. No sooner did they step forward than they became the main topic of gossip. The only thing keeping Sophie calm was knowing she could keep her promise to Marianne. Her friend checked her out, noticed she'd really changed. She said hi to the kid too, surprised to see him there. Sophie asked her to jog her memory about what exactly she'd promised. Marianne said, annoyed, that she knew she'd forget. She brought up the time Sophie messed up someone's dress and pinned the whole thing on her. When she asked for an apology, Sophie promised to grant her request in return. The girl felt ashamed of how awful she'd been before. The way everyone else was looking down on her made that pretty clear too. They turned around when a cocky voice greeted them. Standing there was a mocking girl, dripping in jewelry. Deborah's followers immediately started blabbing about Sophie's disappearance. They made a point of mentioning that she'd come with her son, Deborah dramatically called it a surprise and brought up whose wife she was. They all laughed when they called her a daughter of the Medine family. While Sophie was gone, Deborah had become popular in high society. Looks like she's taking it out on Sophie, really hammering on how long she's been gone. Her so-called friends had the nerve to ask if she's hunting for a new daddy for her kid. Mariana called them out, saying they needed to draw the line somewhere with their nastiness. They immediately snapped back, reminding her how invisible she is. Their words instantly shut Mariana right up. Back to Sophie, they pointed out she even brought the kid around to meet his family. Sophie just smiled and gave them props for doing their homework. They brought up how fiercely she used to guard Tristan's side back in the day. She was so obsessed, she'd run off any woman who even looked at him. Deborah sneered about how cold she was to ditch him and take Tristan with her. You should have seen her face when Sophie agreed and promised it wouldn't happen again. She smiled and said she wanted to show everyone she was ready to embrace a brighter future. After that, the girl humbly reminded everyone that she was just a guest. She turned and left, adding that they shouldn't focus all their attention on her. Her behavior was so different from before, it blew everyone's minds. They looked at her gentle smile and noticed that she now resembled a duke's daughter. Deborah was burning with anger because Sophie hadn't lost her cool. She clenched her eyes shut and vowed to crush that girl. Looks like Adam sensed some weird energy coming from Miss Deborah. He immediately rushed towards his mom, like he wanted to warn her. Nobody else clocked Deborah moving in. She was betting Sophie would throw a fit if her dress got ruined. Deborah snuck up behind the girl, ready to make her look like a fool. She was all set to dump the drink, but Sophie turned around when Adam yelled. In one smooth move, the girl grabbed her attacker's wrist. Then she gracefully spun Deborah into a dance, keeping the wine from spilling. She pulled it off so flawlessly, everyone's jaw dropped. Sophie smiled and said Deborah's moves were a little rough around the edges. She put her on the spot, saying they should dance sometime. Then she got way too close and told her enough was enough. She smirked and asked real quiet, "Seriously? You gonna embarrass yourself even more?" Looks like everyone around heard what Sophie just laid on her. Deborah felt the shame burn and called her out for how she treated Tristan. Her pride wouldn't let her back down, so she decided to keep this train wreck rolling. Sophie just watched, totally bored, wondering what Deborah would pull next. She pointed a finger right at Adam and yelled that Sophie stole the Grand Corps air. Deborah was screaming so loud, her girlfriends had to drag her away. Sophie just gave her a look like, "Yeah, and what of it?" After that, she turned back to Adam and said everything was okay because of him. Adam explained he overheard her plotting to ruin Sophie's dress. He grinned and told his mom she had some killer moves out there. The kid piped up, saying he wanted to dance like that too. But hey, they weren't exactly at a ball. Duke Leo watched the girls and the kid talking, lost in thought. Sophie noticed him staring and was surprised to see him there. The second she looked his way, he snapped his gaze somewhere else. A few hours later, Adam and Sophie finally got a chance to chill. They were so beat, they skipped dinner and crashed for the night. Even Adam was so wiped out, he was out like a light the second his head hit the pillow. The girl gently stroked her little one's hair, lost in thought. She was still turning Deborah's words over in her head, realizing she'd kept Adam from his dad. She knew she was doing the right thing, but nobody would listen to her. She rubbed the back of her neck, realizing she'd been in this situation before. She froze when she felt a little kid's hand touch her. The boy looked like he read her mind and told her she was doing it all for him. He hugged her tight and said with a smile that he loved his mom so much. His endless love made all the painful memories of the past just fade away. Sophie didn't even realize she was crying until the tears just started flowing. Adam immediately started worrying, thinking she was hurt or something. Sophie wasn't hurt, but she couldn't stop crying. The kid didn't ask questions. He just held her close. His love warmed her motherly heart so much, she couldn't hold back her emotions. She thanked him tenderly and promised to do everything in her power for him. For the first time, Sophie considered that Adam seemed to read other people's minds and know what they were feeling. She looked at the boy and realized that the Grand Court abilities were awakening. The next morning, they discovered the stolen jewel. Adam, Sophie, and her mother stared at the object in surprise. The boy didn't understand what was being said, but Sophie explained everything to him. Turns out, a jewelry store in the neighboring country was robbed just a few days ago. The merchant bought the stone from someone, unaware that it was wanted. The woman added that they'd been buying jewelry from him for years and trusted him completely. Leo told us to be careful and stay sharp from now on. Sophie asked, all thoughtful, if he was positive that piece was on the stolen list. He explained they ID'd it by some unique markings. Even so, Madame Medan paid more than retail for it. Lady Medan was bummed, 'cause she really loved that thing. Despite her being upset, Sophie still felt like something was off. A couple hours later, she decided to head down to Main Street. She had an important mission, and she wanted Adam along for the ride. They were both totally down to find a new brooch for his grandma. No sooner did he say that, than she pointed him in the right direction. She barely took a step before Leo was right in front of her. The girl rushed back to her son and scolded Leo for sneaking up on them like that. The guy reminded her that now wasn't the best time to be out shopping. Just then, a playful dude appeared behind him, saying Leo was out of line. He grinned, clutched his chest theatrically, and introduced himself as Lucas Geets. Sophia froze, asking how he knew her name already. He pointed to his colleague and said he'd been filling him in about Sophia. The girl remembered Lucas from the novel. He was quite the charmer. She told the knight they were looking for a new brooch for her mother. Unlike Leo, Lucas actually tried to help and even pointed out a boutique. The girl checked out the display case real close and thanked him for the tip. He also told her to give him a shout if she needed any backup. Lucas waved goodbye, saying they wouldn't be far. Sophie decided not to waste any time and hit up that fancy boutique. She explained she was looking for a gift for her mom and asked to see their best brooches. The super polite consultant hustled right over to show her the latest designs. They were all gorgeous, but Sophie knew none of them could hold a candle to that one. She hesitated when the guy asked if anything caught her eye. Sophie figured she'd try to find something similar, thinking they might have something like it. She gestured and said she was looking for a stone that changes color in the light. Mom and son were pretty surprised when the consultant called it fate. Turns out, they had a whole collection of jewelry made from the same stone. The moment he said that, Adam and Sophie exchanged a knowing look. Sophie initially thought it was just a coincidence, but she wasn't ruling anything out. After a short pause, she straight up asked to see the jewelry. So then the consultant presented them with the complete set of pieces. The guy smiled and said this stone only comes from a couple of places. Sophie noticed a strong resemblance to the stolen brooch. She immediately started wondering if the boutique was connected to some shady characters. Adam, like he could read her mind again, said the seller wasn't what she thought. Looks like that statement finally snapped her out of it. The consultant noticed her hesitation and figured she didn't like the set. Sophie smiled and said she was just curious about the supplier they got the jewelry from. The guy remembered they were actually unloading a shipment at that moment. Then he showed them two shady-looking dudes. The young consultant introduced them as Rick and Barry from Dondich Company. Unlike him, Adam and Sophie immediately sensed something was off. Eventually, they all ended up sitting at the same negotiation table. The men introduced themselves again as wholesale jewelry dealers. Sophie tried not to judge a book by its cover, but these guys screamed trouble. The skinny dude practically wet himself when he heard the Duchess herself was interested in their stuff. The salesman chimed in, all smiles, saying you just can't find stuff like this anywhere else. Sophie saw that smarmy grin again, screaming danger. Her doubts went through the roof when she saw the dirt cheap price. No way these kinds of jewels could go for that little. The guy clapped his hands together and said they could get her anything her heart desires. Adam picked up on his thoughts. This Medina heiress was one heck of a score. They wanted to unload something on her quick, before the knights came sniffing around. The second he realized all this, he felt a knot in his stomach. Meanwhile, Sophie was still trying to figure out why the prices were so low. She figured out pretty quick that they just wanted to unload everything fast. The fact that all the brooches were different was another giveaway. She was about to voice her doubts, but Adam cut her off real quick. He grabbed her hands and yelled at her not to do it. The girl looked at Adam and asked if he knew everything she was thinking. She turned and said she needed to get her dad's opinion on this. The would-be thieves were furious that the deal fell through. They started pressuring her, saying they were leaving the capital today. Sophie didn't know what to do, but she knew for sure she couldn't let them get away. She smiled and said she should probably get her brother's opinion from the shop next door. She asked Adam to get him, silently hoping he'd bring Leo with him. Adam eagerly said he'd go find him. Sophie was sure he'd know right away if the jewels were stolen or not. Now all she had to do was stall until the knights arrived. She wasn't about to let those crooks who fooled her dear mother get away. The thug, with his usual smirk, asked if she had a brother. Sophie smiled and said that even though he was a jerk, He had great taste. Meanwhile, Adam was running down the street as fast as he could. Knight stopped him and warned him that running around the city alone was dangerous. He immediately decided to ask where Sir Lorraine was right now. After that, they hurried to help him find Leo and Lucas. Adam was overjoyed to see Leo and immediately rushed to him. He was almost crying, saying that Sophie had found the stolen jewels. Sir Lotharinia didn't say a word and just scooped him up in his arms. Lucas instantly got his bearings and ordered the others to follow him. Meanwhile, the bandits kept piling the jewels onto the table. Sophie kept reminding them how much money her family had and asked them to bring more. The others didn't realize she was stalling and just did whatever she asked. Sophie was mentally surprised that she had to play the villain. No sooner did she think that than she spotted Leo Lotharingia. He showed up out of nowhere, like some kind of knight in shining armor. Those thugs were absolutely furious when they realized they'd been ratted out to the knights. The fatso tried to take a swing at Sophie, but he got yanked back by the scruff of his neck before he could even blink. Even though the guy was huge, Leo tossed him around like he weighed nothing. He used that thief's face to mop the floor real good. Didn't give him a chance to run. That dude got the fright of his life when the knight stuck a knife in the ground next to him and told him he got off easy. Leo was laying down the law, telling them what could have happened if they'd touched Sophie. Meanwhile, Lucas and the other knight were busy wrangling the second guy. They took another look at that set of stolen jewels. Adam finally got to Sophie once the coast was clear. They hugged each other tight, like they never wanted the moment to end. Adam was crying, still torn up about his mom. The woman hugged the kid and thanked him for saving her again. Of course, Leo had to ruin the moment, grumbling as usual. He started laying into her for not keeping a closer eye on her kid. Leo was blown away by how sure she was that those guys were crooks. She couldn't exactly explain Adam's ability, so she just went along with it. Leo suddenly got right up in the kid's face and asked if I was the one. The guy totally blindsided the mom and kid, saying he'd explain later. They said their goodbyes, since the knights still had staff to question. Sophie watched him go, thinking he must know about Adam's abilities. Leo didn't get free until late that night, and finally got a chance to look at the letter. He skimmed it until he heard a knock at the door. The next second, Sophie walked into the room, radiating confidence. Leo immediately told her she shouldn't be visiting a man's room at this hour. The woman apologized and thanked him for his help. She added that it was thanks to him that they were still safe and sound. The man decided to bring up again her certainty that those two were behind the thefts. He asked her point blank if she knew because of Adam. Leo was the first person Sophie confessed her son's abilities to. After hearing that story, she decided to share the news with her loved ones. They were blown away that their grandson was so gifted. Olivier Medin wanted to see for himself and asked him to read his mind. Everyone around could see Adam's emotions shifting, and they didn't even understand what was happening. The next thing they knew, grandson and grandpa were locked in a joyful hug. Olivier sat his grandson on his lap, thrilled that the gang of thieves had been caught. Leo complimented Sophie for cooperating with the order and being so forward-thinking. The woman thanked him and remembered that they had prepared something for Grandma. They confidently presented her with a shimmering gemstone. Adam grinned and said that they had picked it out together. His grandma was so stoked, she was crying tears of joy. She thanked them from the bottom of her heart and was super happy about the gift. Olivier admitted the fallout from the crime even shook up the royal family. Turns out that jewelry store was the royal family's go-to place for bling. So, they managed to help out a whole country and take down some real bad guys. Sophie silently thanked Lucas for giving her that tip. She was blown away by how one decision helped expose the whole scam. Sophie was happy that her parents were cool with Adam's, unique qualities. She knew there were people out there who'd try to exploit his power for their own gain. She was racking her brain about how to protect her son, but Leo noticed she was lost in thought. Sophie snapped out of it and just said she was lost in thought. She was totally caught off guard when he told her she didn't have to carry all her burdens alone. He casually added that she could always come to him if she needed anything. It was nice for her to hear those kinds of words from such a stone-cold dude. She playfully accused him of being able to read her mind. The guy took the bait and didn't exactly deny it. After that, his face went right back to its usual deadpan look. Sophie was surprised he even cracked a smile in the first place. Deep down, she was stoked that she was able to connect with such a difficult guy. The next day, Sophie heard some weird noises coming from the entrance. Turns out, a messenger from the Grandcourt family just rolled up at the mansion. Sophie got real suspicious when she heard he wanted to meet with Adam. Meanwhile, the kid was just taking a stroll in the garden. No sooner did they hear some weird noise than a bunch of guys popped up in front of them. A chill ran down Adam's spine when he saw the look in the man's eyes. Standing right there was his tyrannical, immature old man. He plastered on this sickly sweet smile and said he was there to take him home. Not long before, he'd been chilling at the mansion, catching up on the news with his mom. They were green with envy after the Medine family's success catching those thieves. The woman was so pissed, she straight up chucked a teacup at the wall. The cup shattered instantly, crashing to the floor and spilling tea everywhere. She clutched at her hair, cursing her former daughter-in-law every which way. Her son just said there's no way airhead Sophie could have pulled this off alone. His mother agreed, thinking the whole thing was fishy as hell. This news led them to believe Adam had awakened the Grandcourt family powers. Tristan ripped into the girl for using their son's power. He was livid, saying it was just plain wrong to take advantage of his own kid like that. Tristan added that it was the only way she could get anyone to pay attention to her. After a pause, he smirked, thinking it was time to bring him home. He glanced at the cup and said the heir needed to work for the good of their family. That's the conversation that made him decide to pay the Medine mansion a visit. He just casually suggested the kid come back home with him, like nothing was wrong. Tristan tried to charm him with this goofy grin, but it just freaked him out. Adam started shaking, just thinking about ending up back in that house. Tristan threw his arms wide, figuring his son was speechless with joy. He went to take a step towards Adam, but accidentally stepped on some chalk. The guy gave his son this nasty look like, "You got my shoes dirty?" The maid sensed something was off and rushed to protect Adam from him. She told him he had no right to take the boy away from there. Tristan's goon immediately told her she better not interfere with his boss. He shoved the girl to the ground, hard. Everyone froze when they saw her hit her head. Tristan repeated that he was there to take back the family heir. Even though they were scared for their lives, she still stood up to protect the kid. She told him they hadn't heard anything and wouldn't hand him over without permission. After she spoke, the injured girl got to her feet, determined, and clenched her fists. Tristan knew they were totally right, and that really ticked him off. He tried to butter Adam up, reminding him what a good little boy he was. Adam instantly thought of his mom when Tristan hinted about what happens to kids who don't behave. Just the thought of it made him tremble even harder, like he was having a full-blown panic attack. Adam felt like it was getting harder and harder to breathe. He was terrified Tristan would hurt everyone he cared about if he didn't go. The kid covered his ears, scared stiff, while the maids ordered him to leave. One of them tried to soothe him, telling him he was free to do whatever he wanted. Adam instantly remembered his mom saying that exact thing to him. It was like she gave him strength, and he strode forward, determined. Tristan was happy his son decided to come with him, but he was dead wrong. Adam yelled that he didn't want to be somewhere he just got beat down and yelled at anymore. His refusal instantly enraged the man, who was completely stunned. Adam thought he was a goner, but then Sophie suddenly appeared in front of him. She shielded him with her body and said he was a son to be proud of. Tristan took it as a challenge and smirked. The woman greeted him and said she'd be his point of contact from now on. And that's how the unspoken battle between ex-husband and wife began. Sophie suggested they skip the pleasantries and get straight to the point. He said thoughtfully that he just wanted to take Adam home. Sophie immediately replied that he doesn't want to go anywhere with him. She added that he doesn't have to worry about raising him or providing for him. The man said he wanted to give her time to cool off, to work through their family issues. Sophie said Adam only started coming into his own after they left that house. She smiled and said she'd made the right choice. Tristan just covered his face, pissed, figuring she'd turned Adam against him. He thought the kid was too young and just giving in to his mother's whims. Sophie was surprised, completely clueless about what he was talking about. Tristan said she'd sunk pretty low, and this couldn't go on any longer. He turned back to Adam, saying his dad wasn't such a bad guy. The guy knew exactly how that tone affected the little kid. Sophie felt sickened by the man's phony words. She cut off her ex, giving him another hard no. Tristan kept pushing, saying Adam was still too young to understand. Sophie flat out refused, saying he'd already made his choice. She grabbed the kid's hand and told the guy he was just indulging himself. The woman added that it was her duty to help their kid on the path they'd chosen. She confidently declared that she was ready to take responsibility for that choice. Sophie didn't leave her ex-husband to single out. She'd already gotten a custody clause written into the divorce agreement. According to it, all rights to the kid now belonged to her. She threatened to sue him over what happened with her maid and demanded he leave. After that, Tristan finally accepted defeat and walked away. He figured he should come back at a better time. Sophie knew this wasn't over, but she'd still managed to stand up for herself and her kid. She glanced at her maids and told them they'd done an amazing job. All three of them were so happy to get the praise, they teared up. They wiped away their tears, beaming as they looked at a happy Adam. When Olivier Madin caught wind of what happened, he completely lost it. He even decided he needed to hire a 20-man security detail for his daughter and grandson. Leo said he could keep an eye on them while he was staying there. Sophie agreed they needed to be on their guard because of Tristan. Adam was just sitting there, watching his mom and the maids. Then, out of the blue, he asked if there was anything he could do to help. He was surprised when Sophie suggested they do something nice for everyone else. She said he could write a thank you note for the maids. He decided to ask them if they'd even want a letter from him. The girls clapped their hands and said they'd be thrilled to get a letter from him. Sophie also said his grandpa would be over the moon if he got a letter. Adam couldn't help but wonder if his mom would be happy to get a letter from him. A new idea popped into his head when he spotted Leo. The guy looked back warily when he saw the kid giving him the once-over. Eventually, Adam asked him to hang out with him on the playground. Leo didn't get why he was sitting there, but then he remembered his promise. The knight figured he'd just accept his fate and glanced down at the kid's drawing. Adam chirped happily, saying his mom loved birds and flowers. The guy awkwardly picked up the crayon after Adam offered it to him. His movements were so clumsy, they even surprised the kid. Meanwhile, Sophie was deep in conversation with her friend, catching up on everything. She was totally blown away when she found out Tristan showed up at their place. Sophie guessed he remembered he had a son after seeing the news in the paper. The girl complimented her on how she personally took down that gang of thieves. She added dreamily that she wished she could have seen it happen in person. Sophie confessed that she didn't catch them. Sir Lotharingia did. Mariana was thrown, 'cause she thought he was a real piece of work, treated everyone like dirt. Sophie didn't think he was that bad, but she agreed he was complicated. She looked away, thoughtful, and said even he was capable of smiling. Mariana's ears perked up at that, made her wonder if there was more to their relationship than met the eye. She jumped to the conclusion Sophie was crushing hard, but Sophie shot that down quick. Sophie said she didn't even want to think about relationships after her divorce. Besides, she knew Leo was supposed to get a girlfriend later on in the story anyway. Talk about a surprise. He suddenly appeared in the room out of nowhere. He cut right to the chase, said Adam wanted to see them ASAP. They barely got to his room before he was showing off his drawings. He threw his hands up, stoked, and said the letter was for Sophie. The kid said she always goes the extra mile for him, so she deserved a letter too. He said it so genuinely and happily, it made her heart flutter. She couldn't contain her joy and just went in for a hug on the kid. Sophie started geeking out over little Adam's drawings. All the drawings were bright and colorful, but one really stood out. Sophie spotted this dark blob, looked like a big ink stain. They didn't want to hurt the kid's feelings, so they started racking their brains trying to figure out what it was. Everyone was surprised when Leo sheepishly said it was a raven. Adam noticed her surprise and explained that Leo drew it. He said he wasn't much of an artist, but he still tried to draw her favorite birds. No sooner had he said that than Marianne gave this sly little smile. Sophie just burst out laughing, saying she never expected that from him. Leo pointed out, kinda embarrassed, that she was still laughing at him. Marianne was really enjoying watching the three of them. It was the first time she'd really looked at them and thought, hey, they actually work together. After that, Adam invited them over to the drawing table. Leo snarked that Sophie's drawing skills weren't exactly top tier either. Even with that jab, they all kept happily drawing away. After a while, there were 3 colorful drawings lying on the table. The next day, Sophie was practically melting in the heat. The maid kept fanning her and saying it wasn't that bad. Still, the low humidity made summer in the kingdom brutal. Sophie glanced at her drink, dreaming of being at the beach. Olivier overheard her silent plea and asked if she wanted to go too. Turns out, he was heading to the port to meet a merchant ship. Sophie's face lit up when she realized he was going to the ocean. She wasn't about to miss a chance to enjoy the sea breeze. Sophie was blown away by the size of the ship, like it could handle anything. She instantly wished Adam, who was stuck back home, could see it. Olivier greeted the ship's crew, happy to see them back home. Looks like they were fond of someone from the Maiden family, judging by their smiles. Olivier also introduced them to his daughter Sophie, who decided to come with him. The men decided to show him some rare tea and fabrics they'd brought back from overseas. One of the ship's hands said it's rare these days for daughters to be interested in their father's work. Sophie smiled and said she loved him and wanted to spend more time with him. The guy said she wouldn't get anywhere with her flattery, but he blushed anyway. Sophie teased him, repeating that she was telling the truth. The younger crew members suggested she take a stroll with them around the port. She tried to refuse, but Leo Lorraine cut her off. She went bright red, realizing their bodies had touched. Figuring she was beat from the heat, he decided to take her to a cafe. And just like that, they strolled on ahead, leaving everyone else behind. The sailors were bummed, wondering where this dude even came from. Sophie smiled, saying he was right on time, as always. Turns out, he'd been ordered to keep Sir Medine safe and sound. Sophie realized this was the royal family looking out for them. She kept sipping her cocktail, while Leo stared off into the distance, lost in thought. He noticed yet again how easily Olivier got along with everyone. That trait, common to all the Medine family members, really impressed him. The second he brought it up, he just went silent, like he was lost in thought. It was the first time he'd ever mentioned his mom passing away right after he was born. Leo comes from a place where the winters are brutal, and war is always shaking things up. That's why his father was more like a drill sergeant than a dad. Leo trained every single day, never hitting the sack until he nailed the technique. He resented the pressure, but it's what made him worthy to take over. That's why he was so touched by the warmth and love of the Medine family. A sadness crept into his voice when he said he didn't even know something like that was possible. Sophie felt bad for him and confessed that she used to think her own father was a monster. She was terrified he'd slam the door in her face if she showed up with a kid. Even so, the second she showed him how she felt, he accepted her. She never even knew her family was always worried sick about her. Sophie couldn't help but remember her past life, spent all alone. Now she figured it was worth talking about your feelings while everyone's still around. Those words hit her hard, right in the chest, 'cause she'd paid the price for learning that. She pushed down the pain and added that she was sure of it now. Meanwhile, back in Lotharingia, things were changing. That same girl was saying goodbye to her family, getting ready to head to the capital. Her dad wasn't convinced she really wanted to do this. Still, the girl was certain her power was needed by the people of the kingdom. The girl's mom hugged her goodbye and told her to take care of herself. Then she walked over to the carriage and waved. She was a holy maiden, heading off to some town she'd never seen. She didn't really need to leave, but she wanted to see Leo. Meanwhile, Sophie was just waking up. She was thinking about Clarice Baroni, a girl from the north with a special gift. She used to spend all her time on the Lotharingia family's land. But recently, the church found out about her divine power and summoned her to the capital. Next, she was supposed to join forces with the knights. That's how they were able to stop the situation that Sophia started. That was basically the plot summary of Serenade of Doom. Sophie remembered that Clarice was supposed to get a letter this summer, which meant she'd be in the capital pretty damn soon. With those thoughts swirling, she headed down for breakfast, a mountain of sweets. Sophie happily watched Adam chow down, clearly enjoying himself. When our girl arrives in the capital, she'll be living in the Altra Academy dorms. Sophie suddenly realized that it wasn't that far from where they were. She was obsessed with that novel and would kill just to catch a glimpse of Clarice. She also wanted to see the academy uniform, which she thought was super cute. And on top of that, she dreamed of being in the spot where the main characters first confessed their feelings. She was so into it, it felt like a real pilgrimage to her. Sophie announced she wanted to visit the academy, using Adam as her excuse. No sooner did she say that, the kid was all over it, wanting to tag along. Sophie was worried about Tristan, but she also didn't want to keep Adam cooped up at home. She agreed to take him, but only if he stuck right by her side. Sophie's mom winked and suggested another, safer option. In the end, the woman decided to bring a knight along for the ride. She apologized for the whim, but he was totally cool with it. Just a couple of minutes later, they were already at the academy. It was the capital's biggest academy, taking students as young as 5 years old. Sophie was stoked that Adam would be rocking a school uniform soon. Leo was thrown by her choice. I mean, it wasn't the only school around. Leo admitted he wasn't a fan of the school's diverse student body. Seems like, in his book, the academy's size was a double-edged sword. He figured Adam might have a tough time finding his feet in such a huge crowd. Leo apologized for butting in with his 2 cents. Still, Sophie thanked him and said she'd keep those points in mind. Leo was surprised at how chill she was about his little rant. They all turned around when they heard some loud, unhappy screeching. Sophie clocked right away that they'd stumbled into someone's drama. They found a girl and some college kid getting into it. She apologized for bumping into him, but he kept on pushing. Sophie saw Adam's reaction and mentally agreed with Leo's take. The dude started making a big deal about his shoulder hurting, and she offered to heal him. Then, in a flash, Clarice showed off her holy power. Everyone was blown away, realizing they were looking at a saint. The guy was so shocked, he completely forgot what he was even mad about. Clarice smiled and told him to come to her if he ever needed help. The woman instantly recognized features from the novel's main character. Before she could even say goodbye to the guy, Leo came running up to her. He asked her, dead serious, what the heck she was doing. To his surprise, she just jumped on the grumpy dude, all happy. He reminded her he'd told her 1,000,000 times not to go throwing her weight around. Leo added that this was exactly why he didn't want her coming here in the first place. He figured the church was just taking advantage of her good nature. Clarice replied, all innocent, that they needed her for something, so she had a reason to be there. She suddenly smiled and said he was just being a worrywart, like always. Sophie's heart skipped a beat when she saw this weird vibe between them. She'd unintentionally stumbled into the origin story of the two main characters. Even with everything going on, she was still a total fangirl at heart. Clarice just happened to notice a woman hanging around with the knight. She gave Sophie the once-over, trying to figure out why she was there. Her face was the last thing Sophie saw before she blacked out. For some reason, she suddenly came down with something. The maid tried to reassure her, saying she'd be back on her feet in no time. Sophie wiped the sweat from her forehead, realizing it was just her body reacting to the pressure. Even though she felt like crap, she was stoked to finally meet Clarice. Even back when she was just reading the novel, she dreamed of saying hi to the saint. This meeting totally confirmed she'd been reborn into the world of the novel. Sophie realized her water pitcher was bone dry. She barely made it out of the room, trying to get to the kitchen on her own. Once she was sure she could stand up straight, she grabbed the water pitcher. She couldn't help but wonder if she'd get chewed out for getting up like this. Sophie thought she could get away with it. But then she bumped into Leo. Leo squinted and asked what she was doing up and about looking like that. She just smiled and said she only wanted to refill the water pitcher. Before she knew it, the knight had snatched the pitcher right out of her hands. Without another word, the guy ordered her to get back to bed. He also said she was being way too bold, wandering around the mansion dressed like that. Sophie blushed, pulled her robe tighter, and apologized. After a while, Sir Lotharingia finally handed her a glass of water. The guy started peeling an apple for her, still kind of blown away by her luck. He mentioned he was starting to believe all the rumors he'd heard about her. They used to say she was a cold-hearted dame who only looked out for number one. But despite all that, he'd come to see her as brave and courageous. All the situations she'd been in, they spoke for themselves, you know? On top of that, he was also pretty sure she was a beautiful woman. He blurted out that a guy just couldn't take his eyes off someone like her. Leo only realized what he'd just said at the very last second. He jumped up all of a sudden and apologized for making her uncomfortable. The woman blushed, admitting she was just caught off guard by his kind words. Before leaving, he told her he meant every word he said. The second he was alone, he froze in his tracks. He didn't get why he'd said all that, and his face went red. Leo knew damn well how forward he'd been expressing his feelings. The knight tried to remind himself that his priority was keeping her safe. He knew he should call in more knights, but he also wanted to protect her himself. Meanwhile, Sophie was in just as weird of a headspace. She couldn't wrap her head around why he'd suddenly shown her affection. She'd always just thought of him as the knight who lived at her family's place. Besides all that, she also remembered he was supposed to fall for Clarice. Sophie felt awkward, thinking she wasn't who he pictured her to be. The next day, she found out he had to protect Lady Clarice. He'd gotten a similar request from the head cardinal himself. Leo apologized for having to leave her in such a tough spot. Sophie smiled calmly and said the servants would take care of her. She even suggested they just hang out together as friends. The guy was surprised by how chill she was, but he agreed anyway. Not even half an hour later, they realized it was about to pour. Leo tilted his head back thoughtfully, like he was studying the sky. He sighed, like he was trying to come to terms with something. Meanwhile, the academy was getting hammered by the downpour too. Clarice was praying diligently, happy to finally be in the capital. The knights watched her from a distance, chatting about the rain. Clarice thanked them for the escort, which brought a smile to their faces. Unlike his partner, Leo wasn't exactly brimming with optimism. Leo couldn't figure out why he thought this mission would be a cakewalk. The man smiled and said the mission's success depended on their strength alone. He seemed to sense why his friend was unhappy, but didn't let on. He nudged Leo in the ribs and asked if he hated the rain that much. Clarice said she was super grateful Leo had a friend like you. Lucas chuckled when she said he wasn't exactly the best at showing his feelings. Clarice beamed, like she was trying to radiate pure joy. Leo told her to cut it out with the baby talk, like he was some kid. He said he hangs out with other people besides Lucas, conveniently leaving out who he meant. Clarice smiled, thinking back to that head of the Medine family. She totally jumped the gun, assuming she was the boss when she was just the daughter. Out of nowhere, Clarice threw her arms around him, hugging him tight. Turns out, she was just freaked out by a massive thunderclap. The loud noise unintentionally reminded Leo that Sophie used to be scared of thunder too. He remembered her running down the stairs, trying to hide from the thunderstorm. Clarice tried to offer him some tea and a little chat. Leo coldly refused and apologized, saying he had to get going. He tossed a final word to Lucas, telling him not to worry and to look after Clarice. Leo knew he was just being overly concerned, but he couldn't leave her alone. Back at the house, Sophia was shocked at how quickly he'd returned. The fact that he was soaked to the bone didn't even slow the guy down. Sophie was happy about his concern and said she was already on the mend. Sir Lotharingia didn't say a word in reply, but her optimism surprised him. Sophie ordered them to get some clothes and a hot bath ready for him. He tried to refuse, said he was fine, but she wasn't having it. The next second, they froze as a thunderclap echoed outside. Meanwhile, Clarice stared sadly at the gloomy sky. Lucas noticed her change in mood and offered to keep her company for tea. Clarice just replied grimly that she was heading back to the dorm. Based on her words and reactions, Lucas guessed that she and Leo had known each other since they were kids. The girl said she'd met him when she was 7 years old. She added that she just wanted to know about his life in the capital. Lucas wanted to offer his help if she needed it, but he wasn't what she was looking for. He understood and said that she'd still have a chance to talk to Leo. On top of that, he decided to be real quiet about exactly where he was going. He saw Clarice's disappointed look and didn't want to bum her out even more. Meanwhile, her biggest rival was chilling at home, no sweat. She was about to meet the new maid at their mansion. Sophie gave her a friendly smile, letting the girl know she was cool. The girl introduced herself as Rita and said she'd be filling in for Sierra for a while. Right after that, she took off after Adam, who was ready to play. After a bit, Sophie decided she'd spend the whole day hanging out with Adam. She bumped into Leo, who figured out she was heading out. Sophie told him she was planning on going to the garden with Adam. The second he heard that, he was all in, ready to go with her. She tried to talk him out of it, saying he should get some rest, but he just kept walking, like he'd already made up his mind. After a short pause, he remembered how Adam almost got snatched in the garden not long ago. He promised he wouldn't get in their way or ruin their relaxation while tagging along. Sophie had to give in. She was totally out of excuses this time. She caved and said she'd be happy to have him if that's what he wanted. She also thanked him for spending his only day off with them. The guy calmly replied that this was exactly how he wanted to spend his day off. Sophie decided not to say anything else, and they headed out to the garden. The whole time, she was picking apart everything he'd said. Trying to clear her head, the woman quickly whipped up a flower crown for her son. She gently placed it on the head of her beautiful child. Sophie clasped her hands together, beaming, and called him her flower prince. He immediately asked if that made her a princess, if he was a prince. Sophie explained that in that case, she'd be the queen. The boy happily ran off to the grass, saying he'd make a crown for her himself. He led his mom to a whole field of flowers and asked which ones she liked best. The woman smiled and gently stroked the flowers, which shared her name. She explained that she was named after those delicate blossoms. The kid grinned, all sunshine, and told her the flowers were as pretty as she was. Sophie's heart skipped a beat at that sweet little smile. She offered him his favorite cookies, the ones she baked. The woman turned to the maid and asked her to bring them out. The girl smiled and told Rita to keep an eye on Adam. The boy kept looking at the flowers, wanting to make a crown out of them. Rita figured it wouldn't hurt to snip off just a few. They smiled at each other when she said his mom would love the crown. After that, Rita carefully started trimming the flower stems. It took a while before they had enough. Adam was stoked when he finally got enough of them. Just then, Sophie came back with a basket of cookies. The kid proudly showed her the crown he'd made just for her. Sophie froze when she saw the flower bed was totally bare. Old her would have gone ballistic, but she was different now. The woman smiled warmly and asked if he'd really made it himself. Adam eagerly held out the wreath, saying he made it for his queen. Sophie knelt down and let him put the wreath on her head. She sincerely thanked him for making her such a thoughtful gift. Leo noticed the maids looking freaked out and asked if something was up with the flowers. Rumor had it, this strain was specially cultivated for the madam's birthday. This sapling was one of a kind, and everyone was stoked when it finally bloomed. Rita started shaking like a leaf when it finally hit her what she'd done. Leo processed the info and asked, "Is this thing really that precious?" The maid calmly replied that she wasn't sure if they'd ever see these buds bloom again. Despite the slip-up, Sophie didn't let on that anything was wrong. Leo could see she was just trying to enjoy the moment with the kid. He picked up a flower from the ground and asked if he could take one. The man said mysteriously that he wanted to give something a shot. Sophie thoughtfully gave him the okay to take the flower with him. Leo kept quiet about exactly what he was going to do with the flower. He noticed the sudden chill in the air, and then everyone hauled ass back to the mansion. Adam and Rita split first, while Leo and Sophie hung back. She was surprised when he said those flowers were important to her. She started to say they'd been picked, but Leo cut her off. Sophie was taken aback by how earnestly he talked about all this, but she kept quiet. Back at the mansion, Leo asked them to get the right materials ready. He said if they got rid of the extra water before the flowers died, they could preserve their beauty. Leo suggested the kid try it out using sand and a wooden box. Adam was stoked to try out this totally new craft. No sooner were they done than Leo tells them they gotta wait a week now. He grabs a bunch of dried flowers and calls it curing. Adam smirks, complimenting the guy on how much he knows. Leo mentions back home the flowers don't last long, 'cause of the cold. This method was invented to preserve their fleeting beauty. Sophie figures it can't be that hard. She wasn't surprised when Leo says he usually screws it up. She decides to ask what exactly he's messing up in the process. He doesn't know the exact reason, figures he just picked him too young. He also guesses he might be using too much force when he buries the flowers. Eventually, people were begging him to just leave the flowers alone. Sophie laughed, realizing he screwed up precisely because he tried so hard. Out of the blue, Leo asked if he could see the bush where the flowers grew. The woman didn't get why, but she agreed to his request anyway. He asked if she'd considered planting some flowers near the bush in Adam's memory. Sophie smiled warmly and thanked him for the idea. She said she'd like to pick out the perfect flower for him. Before he knew it, the guy blurted out that they could pick it out together. He immediately backtracked, saying she could always ask for his help if she needed it. Leo said he thought Adam was the sweetest kid ever. Sophie laughed and asked if he was really that impressed by his charm. He answered honestly that he was, even though he doesn't usually click with kids. He was impressed by how genuinely Adam always communicates with him. The man smiled and guessed it was all because of the love Sophia gives him. She was flustered, since she never expected to hear something like that from him. In her eyes, he was the perfect romance novel hero, good at everything. She decided to ask what kind of flower he thought could describe Adam. Her question seemed to make him really think. He couldn't help but remember how Sophie and Adam spend time together. Leo finally decided that Adam especially reminded him of a sunflower. Sophie figured if her son got a sunflower, then her mom should get a cosmos flower. In the language of flowers, that meant harmony, humility, and innocence. Sophie was surprised that Leo knew anything about the language of flowers. She smiled softly and decided he was pretty darn knowledgeable. The guy blushed and suggested they create a whole flower garden. Little did they know, their perfect little world was about to be shattered by a certain girl. Clarice decided to pay the Madan family's house a little visit herself. She was secretly thrilled that Lucas had spilled the beans about where they lived. The girl was strolling around the courtyard when she spotted a familiar figure. She grinned, eager to run right up to him. Still, she froze when she saw another woman already smiling at him. Leo kept chatting away with Sophie, promising to show her the shop. Clarice hung back, carefully listening to what Leo was saying. Sophie grinned and said she couldn't wait to see Adam's reaction to that. Leo smiled, suggesting they give him a secret surprise. Clarice stood there, stunned, feeling like she'd just overheard something crucial. The sky darkened above her when she learned Sophie was Medina's owner's daughter. Her maid quietly added that she'd split with her husband and come back home. The servant caught snippets of their conversation and asked for clarification. Clarice turned away and said she should probably be polite too, just like Leo. She demanded they change her schedule for tomorrow and let the church know. 2 days earlier, she'd run into Lucas on the training grounds. The saintess gave him a kind but reserved smile. Despite the friendliness, Lucas still tensed up, feeling like something was off. From a distance, she started talking about how she wanted to see Leo at the service. Lucas asked why she couldn't just talk to him directly, like a childhood friend would. Clarice pleaded for help, saying Lucas was the only one she could rely on. The guy couldn't handle that kind of pressure and agreed to escort her to the house. So, he took her to the gates and introduced her to the butler. He saw that they agreed to let her in for the meeting. Lucas mentally kicked himself, knowing this was going to end badly. The next day, Leo decided to show La Sonat's shop to Sophie anyway. Sophie was blown away that a knight even knew about such a fancy store. She couldn't help but smile, thinking he knew something about fashion. They barely took a couple steps when they accidentally spotted Clarice. The girl immediately ran up to Leo, all smiles, totally ignoring Sophie. Looks like Leo had no clue he'd run into her here. She started talking about all the precious memories she had connected to this place. She reminded him how he noticed her shoes were uncomfortable and then bought her new ones. He even put them on her himself and told her how great they looked on her. Clarice hiked up her dress and said she still wears them. That made Sophie feel like a total third wheel. Leo curtly replied that's all in the past, and today he's here with Miss Sophie. Clarice hurried to greet Sophie and thank her for taking care of her friend. The woman modestly replied that she really hadn't done anything. Clarice said she wanted to steal Leo for a bit to help her pick out a dress. Sophie politely agreed, trusting Leo Lotharingia to make the decision. Against the saint's expectations, he said that definitely wouldn't work. He added that he could help pick out a dress another day. Clarice said he's still being stubborn and held out a letter. The guy clocked that familiar seal instantly. He jumped, surprised when he realized it was a letter from his old man. The girl said he couldn't refuse, not if his father was pushing so hard. Sophia said it was all good, and took it cool that he had to go. He promised he'd wrap things up ASAP and get back to her. Clarice reminded him she'd be introduced as his future fiancé, so she needed to pick out the best outfit. Leo shot back that she was just a candidate and shouldn't talk like it was a done deal. The girl declared that everyone thought they were a perfect couple, and she'd be thrilled if he was her groom. Sophie finally remembered that Leo and Clarice were engaged. It made sense, since they ended up husband and wife in the story. After that whole mess, Lucas was mentally praying he was wrong about this. He just happened to stumble upon St. Clarice and Sophie having a face-off. Quick as lightning, the guy ducked behind a pillar and started eavesdropping on their conversation. Clarice said that even though she might have come on strong, everyone's already betting on them as a couple. She gave a nervous little smile and said she didn't want to pressure Leo. The saint clasped her hands together and added that she knows him better than anyone else. Then she gave Sophie a loaded look and said she wasn't letting him go to anyone. Sophie didn't seem fazed at all by her words and just said she was happy they were both driven by love. Clarice sadly added that everyone around them has gotten used to relying on him. She declared that after the wedding, Leo would be leaving the Medine family. She told me to stop relying on him, said it would make saying goodbye easier. Sophie just smiled and told her not to worry, that they had everything covered. She added she could handle anything as long as her son was happy. The woman was sure Clarice would understand if she had someone she loved. As soon as she heard agreement, Sophie suggested thinking about Leo's feelings too. Looks like Clarice often only thought about her own feelings and forgot about the guy. Sophie smiled and added she just wanted him to be happy as his friend. The saint was relieved that Sophie wasn't staking any claims on Leo. Lucas realized, yet again, how full of it all the rumors about Sophie were. They called her selfish and cruel, but it turned out to be the complete opposite. He couldn't help but wonder if Leo would get pissed if he got close to her. Meanwhile, Leo was floored by his dad's idea of an engagement in a week. Clarice figured they saw her as the most promising bride-to-be because she got invited to the capital. The guy ran a hand through his hair, bummed out, trying to figure out how things got to this point. He didn't get why he had to find out this way, instead of hearing it straight from his dad. Unlike him, the wedding preparations were way more fun for Clarice. She touched the lace of her future wedding dress with excitement. The girl decided she should head to the groom's family first. To her surprise, Leo suddenly offered to go with her. He left out the part about how he just didn't want them making decisions without him. Clarice thought he was just worried about their future life together. She floated around the room, all smiles, thinking this was the biggest day of his life. Leo walked up to Sophie and apologized for having to take off. He offered to walk her back to the mansion, but she said she still had things to do. She glanced back at the happy Clarice and told him he should hurry. The guy turned around and saw his bride waving goodbye with a huge smile. He turned to Sophie and promised to make it up to her later for ditching her. The guy touched the gift in his pocket and realized he never got to give it to her. He looked at her one last time before leaving, promising himself he'd be back. Little did the guy know, she was thrilled that everything was going according to plan. That very day, she got right to picking out a flower for Adam. She flipped through the book, trying to find something. Anything. She was beyond surprised when she spotted Lucas. He didn't want to admit why he was there, and started laying on the charm. The guy grinned and asked if the lady needed a hand with her shopping. Despite the dazzling smile, she gave him a firm no thanks. She calmly explained that she'd promised Sir Lotharingia they'd pick out these flowers together. The second he tried to butter her up, she cut him off, asking what he really wanted from her. The guy sprawled out like he owned the place and said he wanted to see the real her. What blew him away was how chill she was responding to Clarice flipping out. He also confessed he was peeking because he was worried about the saint's behavior. Lucas confidently added that he was definitely thankful for what he saw. Sophie sarcastically suggested he should apologize, not be grateful. He suddenly asked why she turned down his help, but agreed to go shopping with Leo. Sophie calmly explained that he was the one who suggested visiting this place. To her surprise, he suddenly stood up and offered to make a bet. He winked playfully and asked her to wait just a little bit. Sophie saw him approach the consultant and tried to figure out what it all meant. She felt a pang of sadness, wishing she could go home to her son. She couldn't help but imagine him happily greeting her. That thought brought a smile to her face and made her want to go on a shopping spree for gifts. She immediately realized she was going to have to get presents for everyone else too. Lucas came back and proposed a bet where he wins if he can figure out her feelings. Sophie gave him a suspicious look, not following his train of thought at all. He dramatically guessed what she was so eager to get home for. As soon as he heard yes, he decided to pull a fast one. Turns out, he'd arranged for a consultant to put together some seriously lavish stuff. Sophie smiled and asked how he'd figured out she needed to buy gifts. The guy smugly said he picked up on it from her conversation with Clarice. His answer just confirmed to Sophie how observant he really is. Lucas smirked and asked if he could count on a date as his reward. Too bad for him, he got shot down faster than a clay pigeon. He gave Sophie the puppy dog eyes when she told him he could help her with groceries. She grinned and said that was his prize for losing their bet. It blew her mind how badly this weirdo wanted her attention. Meanwhile, Clarice snuck off to a secret meeting with the pastor. She asked him if he really thought Sophie was such a bad apple. The pastor was buying what Sophie's ex was selling, but Clarice wasn't seeing it. The guy told her she shouldn't mess with that kind of serious trouble. Clarice forced a smile, totally unsure what to do next. She rushed to say goodbye when he reminded her it was time to leave. After that, the girl bolted out of the prayer room like a shot. The man clenched his fists, figuring she'd turned out to be way more useful than he thought. He was sure that with the church's strongest knight backing him up, he'd have nothing to worry about. That's exactly why he decided to summon Clarice and turn her into his puppet. Meanwhile, back at the Medine house, news of Leo's departure reached Adam. Sophie smiled and said he'd be back before he knew it. Adam gave his mom a sad look, saying he wanted to show him his drawing. Sophie instantly pictured how Leo might react. In the end, she suggested they just mail the drawing to him. Adam was stoked when he found out the letter would arrive just in time for him. Right after that, he got straight to work on writing the letter to Leo. Sophie watched him closely, all the while replaying that conversation in her head. She was especially curious to see if things were playing out the same way as in the novel. Meanwhile, the future couple's carriage was just pulling into town. Clarice was beaming, taking in the familiar scenery. Unlike her, Leo wasn't even expecting to be back home so soon. He silently hoped the church's influence hadn't spread to his lands. Clarice noticed the guy's hesitation, but she didn't let on. She immediately started hugging her parents, overjoyed. Leo bolted to his dad, saying they'd hash out the marriage thing later. Dark thoughts swirled in his head. He had to get to the bottom of this. A minute later, he was in the office, where a man sat calmly. "Took you long enough," Aldalof of Lotharingia grumbled, clearly annoyed. Leo cut right to the chase, saying he wanted to put the engagement on hold. After a brief back and forth, the man finally agreed to hear him out. He asked Leo to explain why he'd decided on Clarice in the first place. Aldalof turned away, asking why Leo needed to know that. Leo stated flatly that he wanted to understand the reasoning behind his decision. His father just replied that Clarice was meant to become part of their family. He mentioned Leo didn't have anyone in mind, which seemed kind of fishy. Originally, his dad wanted him to marry some noble chick from a neighboring kingdom. He brought that up, thinking his dad would respect his opinion or something. Leo just stared daggers at his dad and asked why he'd decide something like that without even asking him. The old man just wearily looked up and said he'd never been a role model for a father. He added that he always wanted Leo to be happy and that his wishes should just be accepted without argument. Leo's voice took on a hard edge when he heard his dad's words. He asked if his opinion was just going to be ignored no matter what. He was speechless when his dad just straight up agreed with him. Just then, Clarice impatiently barged into the office. Leo's dad stood up and said they were just wrapping up their chat. The girl said, all dreamy-eyed, that she was just about to have a word with him. She totally lost it when she saw Leo walk out of the office. The girl immediately took off after him, trying to catch up. She tried to find out what exactly had him so messed up. She thought he didn't want to marry her, but couldn't bring himself to say it. The girl touched his hand and asked him to let go of his worries. She played along with what she thought he wanted and said their marriage was strictly business. Clarice added that he's the future head of the duchy and this is a crucial decision. The girl said modestly that they'd known each other since childhood and her family has a pretty solid pedigree. She smiled sweetly and said even the cardinal was happy about their union. Clarice never imagined that sentence would shut down his suspicions. The man asked grimly if this marriage was really the cardinal's wish. The girl immediately replied that he just wanted them to be happy together. Leo knew perfectly well how naive she was and realized his fate was sealed. Clarice froze as he slowly pulled his hand away. Little did they know, a girl was watching them. She realized things were getting interesting and decided to get involved. Leo walked away silently, as if Clarice wasn't even in the hallway. The girl stumbled back, flustered, and bumped into a servant carrying letters. The collision sent a whole stack of letters scattering across the floor. Clarice tried to help, but then she accidentally found a letter from Sophia Medan. She instantly remembered that sweet, smiling woman. The girl quickly pocketed the letter, taking advantage of the chaos. Little did she know, that girl witnessed the whole thing. That same day, Leo went to the Lotharingia family's training grounds. He also noticed that the team hadn't changed at all in the meantime. All the knights were super interested in the news about his upcoming wedding. The man politely dodged the question, saying he didn't want to talk about it. He asked them to make sure the marriage info didn't leak to the public. That threw everyone for a loop, because they thought the marriage thing was a done deal. Leo just kind of mumbled back that it wasn't as simple as they thought. He figured he'd blow off some steam with training while the other guys gossiped. The guy got all fired up and asked if anyone wanted to join him. They saw that glint in his eyes and knew right then and there that was their commander. After that, the knights started coming at their idol one after another. He blocked every attack like it was nothing and called them out on their weaknesses. By the end of it, those knights were flat out wrecked, all over the training ground. Leo turned around, looking bummed, and snapped, "Get up, let's go, we're not done yet." Those beat-up rookies shot their teacher a real scared look. Looks like everything that's happening is putting a smile on Lady Lizette's face. The guys were stoked to see their captain's sister. She greeted him with a playful smile that set everyone else's hearts on fire. It was the first time Leo had seen her since arriving in the city. He sadly apologized for not even saying hello. Lizette pulled out a bottle of booze and said it had been way too long since they drank together. She asked if he'd cover for his favorite little sis with their dad. They noticed the knights had already thoughtfully set up a table for them. Leo didn't have a choice but to down a glass of liquor. Lizette immediately recognized the top-shelf quality of the expensive booze. Leo cut to the chase, wanting to know exactly what she wanted to talk about. The girl thoughtfully pointed out his weird habit of beating around the bush. Leo caught her drift and asked point-blank what she was implying. The girl slammed her glass on the table, a glint in her eyes, and brought up his marriage to the saint. She asked if he really needed their old man to spell it out for him, that the church wanted this marriage. The guy explained what his father had said, adding that he wasn't just going to roll over and accept it. Lisette smirked, calling them both stubborn mules who couldn't communicate. She reminded him that their father always said he'd get to decide who he married. But then, out of nowhere, he insisted that he tie the knot with Clarice. That sudden change set off alarm bells for Lisette, so she did a little digging of her own. She gave Leo the impression that his father was meeting with someone from the church. Lisette didn't know what their deal was, but she was sure they made a pretty sweet offer. Leo crossed his arms, looking thoughtful, and said he knew it all along. He thanked her for the info and was about to leave, but she asked him to have a drink. The guy sat back down and finally took a swig of the hard stuff. He could finally taste the liquor, something he hadn't had in ages. Lisette laughed and said that now he was totally complicit in the crime. She wished he'd take the heat from her dad for her swiping the bottle. The guy agreed, knowing there was no arguing with her. On the way back to the castle, Lisette said he deserved to forge his own destiny. She winked, promising to have her little brother's back. Leo thanked her, stoked to know he had her support. Before saying goodbye, Lisette suddenly remembered something. A letter. She said it was delivered to her by mistake, but it's definitely for him. The guy snatched the envelope, eager to see who sent it. He was totally floored when he realized it was a letter from Adam. It said the kid decided to make him some flowers. He used the skill Leo taught him to do it. Sophie added that Adam put in a ton of effort and deserves some praise. The guy smiled awkwardly when he saw she wanted to confirm when he'd be back. Lisette was actually surprised he even knew how to smile. Leo figured he looked kinda goofy, but she told him he didn't. She couldn't help but wonder who'd had such an impact on her ice-cold brother. The girl grinned, thinking she needed to get herself over to the Medine household too. Meanwhile, Leo was lost in thoughts of the family he was so desperate to get back to. He couldn't shake the image of Sophie's gentle smile. Adam's mom. Just thinking about the Medine house warmed his heart right up. Lisette didn't know anything about Sophie, but she definitely liked this new side of him. Leo stepped forward and out of the blue announced he was heading back to the capital tomorrow. Back at HQ, Clarice was staring thoughtfully at her glasses. She remembered sitting under the tree as a kid, bawling her eyes out. That was the day she saw that little boy with the scraped-up knees. She confessed she was crying because the other kids were teasing her, calling her grandma. Leo was surprised, but he just calmly said they really suited her, and it wasn't true. From that moment on, Clarice saw him as her savior, her knight in shining armor. She closed her eyes and remembered the first time she met Lisette. That girl found out about her plans and rushed to snatch the letter away. Clarice felt this crazy emotional surge and just unleashed her power. The maid was totally blown away that she'd healed her own eyes. Clarice turned around and said she wanted to become the perfect wife, worthy of Duke Leo. She flashed a bright smile and said she'd go check up on him. After that, the girl thoughtfully stepped towards the dark hallway. Meanwhile, Adam and Sophie were having a blast in the Maiden Duchy. They were totally engrossed in putting different geometric shapes together. Sophie mentioned his grandparents were going to a ball in honor of the Queen. Adam froze, looking surprised, like he didn't get what that meant. Sophie started flipping through the pages, lost in thought, like she was searching for an answer. She explained it's an evening where everyone wears their fanciest clothes and dances to music. Sophie couldn't help but think about how much she'd love to see Leo and Clarice dance. She spaced out a little when Adam asked if she was going to the ball. That very second, she heard that Olivier Medane wanted to see her. To her surprise, her parents asked her to go to the ball in their place. She asked, confused, why they couldn't make it. Turns out, they'd received word about the arrival of an envoy from the Strahan nation. They had to meet him today, which meant they wouldn't make it to the ball. Sophie's parents left the house, apologizing for the sudden change of plans. Sophie tried to refuse, but they left so fast she didn't have a chance. She was stuck with it, being the only child of the Medine family. The woman ordered everyone to start getting ready for the ball right away. She put her son on the floor and apologized for having to leave. She winked at Adam and asked him to build her a castle while she was at the ball. The boy eagerly promised he'd make sure she loved it. Sophie smiled gently, stroking her son's head. He gazed after her thoughtfully as he watched her leave. After a while, the woman finally arrived at the lavish celebration. She found herself drawing way too much attention again. Being observant, she noticed that all the guests had green something going on. Unlike her, Every single one of them had some green accessory. She remembered that even her mother's dress had been green. Marianne suddenly rushed up to her and asked her what she thought this was all about. The girl asked, freaked out, if nobody told her about the dress code. Sophie looked away, lost in thought, and realized she'd been set up. She heard footsteps and had a pretty good idea who was behind it. The woman turned her head and saw Tristan and her mother-in-law laughing at her. Their gloating made it clear they were the ones who'd done this to her. Her mother-in-law's glare was like a viper sinking its fangs in. Sophie clenched her fist, fighting to keep her cool. She stared them down, telling herself to stay strong. The woman reached deep inside herself, remembering who she used to be. She froze, feeling the faintest touch on her shoulder. From now on, she couldn't afford to screw things up. Tristan's mother decided to give her some extra love and greeted her. She laid into her for showing up solo and not sticking to the dress code. She sneered and said her son was right to dump her sorry ass. Everyone around immediately started whispering about how Sophia really messed up. Furious, Mariana wanted to step in, but Sophia stopped her. She calmly bowed and greeted Lady Catherine in return. Sophia apologized for being such an eyesore with her behavior. She added that she was currently swamped raising her son, so she couldn't be bothered. The woman smiled and said she'd definitely find herself a new man. Looks like she played the single mom card to get some sympathy. Catherine said she understood, but she still had to stick to the dress code. She pointed to her earrings and made it clear everyone was supposed to wear the queen's eye color. Sophie remembered that her letter mentioned sapphire blue. Catherine scoffed, saying it was weird she showed up in blue. She turned to Tristan, expecting him to back her up. He took off his ring and said the queen's eyes were more like emeralds. The guy glanced down at the ring, which had a bright green stone. He touched Sophie's shoulder and said his mother always had it in for her. Sophie couldn't believe he chose this moment to bring that up. Tristan smirked, saying he'd give her the ring as an apology. He added that if she accepted it, she'd automatically become part of the family. The guy savored those words, adding that Adam would be part of it too. Sophie was floored that he was trying to win her back with manipulation. She understood that breaking the dress code was like a slap in the face to the royals. The girl knew she had no choice but to play along. Making things even worse, the queen just showed up in the ballroom. Sophie turned around, surprised, as everyone greeted Beatrice. The queen paused, carefully scanning her subjects. She thanked them for coming and said she hoped they were enjoying the evening. The nobles clapped like seals, welcoming the queen. Tristan chimed in, reminding everyone that the duke's family had to greet her first. He smiled like a snake, practically shoving the ring into her hand. Despite the pressure, she turned down his offer. He couldn't believe she was passing up this. She said she wasn't about to cause him any trouble because of her mistake. Adam played along and walked off, saying her stubbornness was almost impressive. Catherine said she was looking forward to seeing the queen's reaction. Sophie got in line with the other aristocrats, waiting to greet the queen. She bowed gracefully and introduced herself. "Didn't you see the dress code on the invitation, dear?" the queen asked. Sophie had always heard the queen was a sharp cookie. She could feel the queen's eyes boring into her, knew she couldn't get away with a lie. All she could do was tell the truth, even if it dragged the Maiden family name through the mud. She was about to explain, but then the queen noticed some commotion. Sophie turned and saw everyone was glued to something across the room. Turns out, Duke Leo of Lotharingia himself had just arrived at the banquet. Sophie never imagined he'd show up at a time like this. The man came up beside her and whispered for her to trust him. He apologized for being late and introduced himself to the queen. The queen returned his greeting, asking who he was with. The guy hesitated before finally saying he was with Sophie. He smirked, gesturing towards the one whose reputation was on the line. Leo grinned, like he knew everything that was going down. Sophie froze, totally clueless how he found out about any of this. Queen Beatrice studied the two of them, deep in thought. The man announced he had a special gift prepared for her. He added that it fit the dress code and would prove they came together. Sophie's jaw dropped, completely speechless. Tristan chimed in, saying Leo was playing a seriously dirty game. He remembered Sophie saying she took full responsibility for her outfit. Everyone started up again about Sophie lying, and how Leo just doesn't get women. Leo just said she'd never lie if she felt safe. His eyes went dark as he asked if anyone at the party had threatened her. Tristan flinched, like the Duke's gaze could see right through him. Leo asked if he could keep the promise he'd made to his partner. The queen calmly nodded, and then he pulled out the gift. Sophie froze, feeling her heart pounding like crazy from the anticipation. She was grateful he saved her, but didn't understand his angle. She was sure he wouldn't gain anything by sticking up for her. Still, here he was, standing in front of her, waiting for her to say yes. The man opened the box, showing off a gorgeous emerald brooch. Sophie accepted it, knowing he was doing it with a pure heart. She smiled and thanked him for such a lavish gift. Sophie pinned it right over her heart, letting it shine for everyone to see. Leo smiled thoughtfully and said it looked perfect on her. He glanced over at the Grandcourt family, who were burning with envy. The man gave Tristan a heavy look, a look that said a whole damn lot. He wanted to bite back, but Catherine stopped him. Finally, after all that, everyone could get back to the party. Lucas was on duty and admitted Leo totally blew him away. Leo thanked him for that, since Lucas was the one who gave him the heads up. Turns out, the night passed on the news before Leo even showed up. He was stoked he did, 'cause it put a smile on Sophia's face. Lucas decided to just come out and ask Leo if he was into Sophie. The question caught him so off guard, his cheeks actually flushed. Lucas grinned when he added he'd take off if he kept teasing him. After a quick thought, the knight called his buddy over and pointed to the dance floor. He figured he'd remind him that the first dance was about to wrap up. He snatched Leo's glass and told him it was time to ask his partner for a dance. Leo didn't show it, but he was still grateful to his buddy for the assist. He beelined straight for Sophie and asked her to dance. Lucas watched the couple, lost in thought, feeling all kinds of conflicted. He gripped his glass tighter, promising himself this was the last time he'd cut him any slack. Meanwhile, Sophie and Leo were twirling in a graceful dance. Sophie asked him if that brooch belonged to the Medine family. She was surprised when he repeated again that it was a gift. He confessed that he'd stopped by that boutique they'd been to earlier, before the ball. He was just passing by a display when he spotted it. The moment he saw it, he just knew it was perfect for her. Turns out, he remembered she was born in April, and Adam in May. He was so prepared, he even picked out stones based on their birth dates. The brooch symbolized her embracing Adam, holding him close. Sophie was blown away by his thoughtfulness and smiled sweetly. She laughed happily and thanked him for such an amazing gift. They enjoyed each other's company for a long time before night fell. Leo walked the lady back to her family's place, a place she hadn't been to in ages. Sophie tripped over her dress, but he caught her just in time. She awkwardly pointed out that he'd been saving her all night. He said, dead serious, that she could always count on him any time. Despite all the moves he was making, Sophie knew she wasn't the main character in his story. That's exactly why she was trying to keep a little space between them. She gave him a bright smile and thanked him for the evening. She dipped out so fast, he didn't even get a word in. He just stood there, his head buzzing with a million thoughts. Unlike him, Sophie could take her mind off things thanks to the staff. She saw he was into her, but she kept reminding herself to keep her distance. That night, she had no idea that something was about to happen that would throw all her plans out the window. She never would have guessed that soon they'd be walking down the street, looking like one big happy family. Lost in thought, Sophie went back to the room to check on Adam. She reread the invitation, confirming it had been switched out. The woman voiced her concerns to Leo on the way back home. Turns out, Adam spotted a suspicious servant hanging around. He somehow tracked down Leo and managed to tell him what he felt. The kid didn't want this getting around, so he whispered it to him. Sophie was blown away that Leo still managed to save her. Leo thoughtfully added that they also managed to ID the servant. Sophie didn't want anyone knowing about Adam's abilities, except Leo and her family. That's why she wanted to expose the traitor without the knight's help. She froze when she felt the kid's hand on hers. Adam thought it was morning already and greeted her with a warm smile. His joy was short-lived, because he woke up to being forced to eat vegetables. Sophie tried to convince him, saying that tomatoes are actually good. Adam figured she wanted a tomato too and held it out to her. The maid suddenly reminded them that it's harvest festival time in the city. People give thanks for the bountiful harvest and say their prayers. Adam perked up and declared that he wanted to go too. Sophie immediately started thinking about needing someone to come with them. She knew it wouldn't be right to rely on Leo alone. Adam picked up on her vibes and figured she and Leo had a falling out. She smiled and said he was just too busy, so she'd ask Lucas instead. Before she could convince Adam, Leo himself showed up in the room. The kid immediately blurted out that they wanted to go to the festival. Leo pondered his words, like he was trying to remember this festival. After thinking for a moment, He announced he could escort them around town. Sophie smiled and said she was planning to ask other people for help. He asked if they seriously thought they could find a bodyguard better than him. They immediately started arguing because Sophie didn't want to burden him. Leo Lotharingia masterfully countered all of the girls' arguments. Sophie was worried about maybe stepping on some toes with Clarice if they hung out too much. The guy was racking his brain, wondering if he'd done something to upset Sophie and mess with her head. Adam knew exactly what they were worried about, and a little smirk crept across his face. He squeezed both their hands and said, "Let's all go together, all right?" Bottom line, his suggestion shut down their argument for good. Adam led them through the city streets, all hyped up, still holding their hands tight. They kept hitting up all these stalls with amazing, mouth-watering food. The sheer size and vibrant colors of the festival were insane, showing off all the best parts of fall. Sophie was totally digging spending time with her son and this guy. Adam snapped out of his food coma and noticed Leo just standing there. He straight up asked his mom why she wasn't feeding him too. That sounded so innocent and surprising. It caught them off guard. He managed to throw even cold-blooded Sir Lothair off his game. Adam got bummed out and asked if it was all his fault. He thought Sophie didn't want to bring Leo along, but she said that wasn't it. The kid was working her for all he was worth, trying to get her to feed the guy. He pleaded so convincingly, she felt like she had no choice. Eventually, she gave in and held out the spoonful of soup to Leo. The guy wanted to refuse, but he was practically burning up with embarrassment. He felt the pressure, staring into those two pairs of pleading blue eyes. He finally caved and drank the soup from the spoon Sophie was holding. Adam saw him shyly covering his face and asked if he liked it. The kid was over the moon that he'd finally agreed. His joy brought a smile to Sophie's face until she glanced at Leo. She was surprised to see a tender smile on his face. The woman watched her son feed this man and felt happy. Adam wiped his mouth and accidentally caught a show. Sophie noticed the group and said it was a puppet theater. The boy grinned and asked if he could watch too. Sophie agreed to take him, as long as he didn't bother the performers. After that, the boy sat down on a bench next to the maid. It just dawned on her that these shows run pretty long. Leo suddenly suggested picking out some flowers for Adam while we had the chance. Sophie pictured him surrounded by sunflowers again and was totally down for it. Right after that, they headed straight for the flower shop. Leo explained that this place was a major supplier. Turns out, he got into flowers because Lizette's obsessed with them. He also mentioned, his sister mostly just bosses him around. Sophie figured their dad must have raised him and his sister by himself. She mistakenly thought he was a stand-up guy. The next thing she noticed was how dark his expression got. She got worried right away and asked if something had happened between them. Leo answered coldly that he and his father had a disagreement. He always said Leo could choose his own bride. But then he did the opposite. After that, Sophie finally understood why he was so upset that day. She realized they didn't even tell him in person. It was just in a letter. Leo added that his father didn't even explain why. He just said to accept his decision without question. He also apologized for dumping all this family drama on her. The girl thoughtfully said that for some reason, his father went ahead with it anyway. The man got interested in her train of thought and asked why he would do that. Thanks to her, he considered for the first time that his father might have been trying to protect him. He doubted that, especially since he couldn't forgive his own dad for doing something like that. Sophie smiled, saying she really hoped they'd patch things up eventually. She winked, adding that Adam would be bummed if they didn't. Looks like she actually managed to cheer that gloomy guy up a little. She showed him the flower and decided to explain what it symbolized. In the language of flowers, it meant something that was already decided. After that little chat, they headed back to Adam. Sophie told the boy to hold her hand tight, so he wouldn't wander off and get lost. She smiled, thinking about what a nice day it had turned out to be. It took a second for the girl to realize that the dude who bumped into her had dropped an envelope. She let go of the kid's hand for just a second, and the crowd swept him away. He kept staring at his mom, like he sensed something was off. Leo realized something was wrong and tried to figure out what happened. Adam pointed out Sophie wasn't there and blinked his eyes. He stated the obvious with surprise. His mom was gone. Meanwhile, the woman managed to catch up to the man. She gave him back what he dropped, and he awkwardly thanked her. Looks like she's just now realizing she's lost her family. The maid anxiously remembered that Sophie has a terrible sense of direction. She promised to look for her and asked him to watch Adam. Adam gripped the guy's hand tight and started checking out the others. The kid was getting seriously worked up, started crying because he was worried about his mom. Leo immediately figured he was just freaked out about being separated from his mom. He started racking his brain on how to calm him down, and then he spotted a dad with his kid. He told the boy they could find Sophie faster if they got up high and took a look around. His plan worked, and Adam finally managed to catch his breath. Leo steadied the kid's back and asked if he'd seen Sophie from up there. Adam smiled at how many people were milling around. He happened to notice a family, kid, mom, and dad, happily strolling through the square. The kid said sadly that he wished he had a good dad too. Leo couldn't help but wonder what kind of father Tristan had been. Adam hid his face and said he was always giving his mom a hard time. He was always putting Adam down too, which made him constantly shake with fear. The boy sadly hugged Leo's head and said he just wanted to protect his mom. Leo calmly replied that, unfortunately, you don't get to pick your parents. Adam didn't seem to get it and asked why it had to be that way. Leo put him down and smiled, saying he didn't know either. He added that only Adam could decide how to live his life. Adam said he loved their new place because his mom was always smiling there. Leo smiled back and said that she made the right call. The kid looked ahead and said that's exactly why he loved his mom so much. He buried his face in his hands when Leo said she loved him too. The boy was surprised, since he didn't always eat his veggies or behave himself. He started crying, thinking his mom left because he was such a pain. The knight said that wasn't true, because to her, he was the most precious thing in the world. He squeezed the boy's hands and smiled, like he wanted to prove it to him. Adam stopped crying and asked how he knew all that. Leo called it a secret, but promised he'd understand what he meant soon. Adam smiled softly back and wiped away his tears, then held out his pinky. The man was happy to see the smile back on his face again. He suddenly remembered the tomatoes the kid wouldn't touch. Leo told him it didn't make him a bad kid, but he could try him a different way. Then he offered him a sun-dried tomato from the bag. The second he tasted that weird thing, his face lit up like a Christmas tree. Wouldn't you know it? Sophie showed up right then. Adam grabbed another tomato, grinning from ear to ear. He immediately ran to his awesome mom, the one he was so scared of losing. Sophie apologized for, causing so much trouble. Adam said he had a blast hanging out with Sir Lotharingia. Sophie thanked him for looking after Adam, but Leo said he was happy to spend time with him too. They walked past the pillar, completely unaware that the priest was lurking behind it. He was about to douse Sophie with water, but Leo shielded her with his jacket. Sophie was totally confused, trying to figure out what the heck just happened. Leo turned around and saw the freaked-out priest, who definitely wasn't expecting him. He quickly realized he'd been caught red-handed and apologized for the whole thing. Clarice was watching the whole scene play out from the academy window, deep in thought. Once she saw the operation had gone south, she booked it out of there. Little did she know, Leo had already caught a glimpse of her silhouette. He just kept staring silently at the building, like something finally clicked in his head. That same evening, he got right back to his usual grind. He sighed, finally done with the letters, and set down the seal. The guy stared thoughtfully at the gifts Adam had given him. He smiled softly and called it a perfect way to end the day. Leo took a breath and started digging into the attacker's background. The church was packed with worshippers of the Holy Maiden, Clarice. He remembered the church even created a holy guard to protect Clarice, so he figured this priest must have been one of her inner circle. During the incident at the Harvest Festival, he claimed it was a mistake. Still, Leo was sure his real target was to douse Sophie. He was obviously waiting for her to stop nearby, so he could pull it off. Besides that, he also remembered Clarice watching it all from the window. Leo pushed the thought aside for a second, figured he was just imagining things. The next day, Clarice started her morning with prayers at the temple. She prayed non-stop, standing in the exact same spot. The priest got worried, told her she needed to take a break. She just smiled at him and said she was doing fine. They fell for her all over again when she said she felt power while praying. Looks like Clarice liked the reaction she was getting. Just recently, Leo headed to Lorraine 3 days before the engagement. He got up the nerve and asked everyone to postpone the engagement. Clarice's parents were floored by Leo's unbelievable audacity. They were crushed, seeing all the preparations and what their daughter was feeling go down the drain. Leo hung his head, begging for forgiveness, but that only made her dad even angrier. Clarice calmly stroked his hand and told him she was okay. She smiled and said she was ready to wait as long as it took. The girl surprised everyone by suggesting they shelve the whole thing for now. She also reminded them how her mom had been dying to go to the ball in the capital. She practically hustled her parents out the door, using the ball preparations as an excuse. She glanced at Leo and promised she'd smooth things over with her folks. The guy apologized for causing so much trouble. She asked if he wanted to make it up to her, if he was really that sorry. Clarice smiled and said she just happened to be scheduled to work at the church. So, Leo became her escort while she was healing people. The girl enthusiastically helped everyone who needed treatment. She thanked Leo and said that being near him made her feel like she could do anything. She added that they'd be family soon, so she'd smooth things over with everyone. The girl smiled and looked at him, expecting him to agree. Much to her disappointment, all she saw in his eyes was coldness and emptiness. A priest appeared before them, thanking the girl for her service. He smiled and said that their marriage would bring prosperity to these lands. Leo tried to back out, but she jumped in and agreed for him. She floored him, saying these lands would be even better with them working together. She was totally convinced she was the best choice to be his wife. Just then, a servant showed up and handed Leo an urgent letter. Leo read it and realized the Medine family had a ton of stuff to deal with. Clarice's face fell when he read that Sophie would have to go to the ball alone. Right then and there, Leo pulled out his pocket watch and checked the time. He was about to announce he was leaving, but she decided to pile on even more work. The next thing you know, a whole crowd of sick villagers shuffled into the room. She turned to Leo and said he should be worried about them. She was really hoping he'd stick around a little longer. Leo was bummed out, until he felt a hand on his back. Out of nowhere, Lisette was right there, offering to take over for him. He was stoked that his big sister had his back again. Clarice wanted to object, but then she remembered that one incident. Lisette thanked her for her hard work. Speaking as a member of the Lorraine family, she smiled at the knights and said she'd like to hang out with the locals. Like it was no big deal, she added that they should all spend more time together. She subtly moved in on Clarice, playing her like a fiddle. She hinted that Clarice didn't want Leo finding out about the letter. The girl slumped, feeling the weight of her situation crashing down on her. She knew how badly this was going to mess things up with Leo. Lisette wondered aloud what would have happened if she hadn't found that letter. With every word, Clarice felt more and more terrified. Lisette told Leo to get out while the gettin's good, dripping with sarcasm. He smirked at first, but then his face went hard, and he glanced at the exit. The guy bolted for the door, leaving Clarice completely screwed. Clarice froze, feeling totally abandoned and worthless to the one she loved. So, they kept grinding away until evening rolled around. Lisette revealed that she hadn't told Leo the full extent of what she did. She smirked, real sly, when Clarice eagerly asked what was up. The girl held out her hand, saying she wasn't the type to do something like that for no reason. Clarice perked up, thinking Lisette was going to be on her side. She started babbling about how she accidentally grabbed the letter and wanted to give it to Leo herself. Lisette knew it was BS, but she kept playing along. She agreed, saying it would be a real low blow if she'd done it on purpose. The girl turned around and said he looked pretty damn happy reading that letter. She was messing with Clarice, hinting that there was someone in the Medine family he really cared about. Clarice tried to say he was just polite to everyone he owed something to. She went on, saying she thought that was a really great thing about him. Lisette smiled warmly, saying she totally got where she was coming from. Clarice perked up, thinking the girl was on her side. She froze when Lisette asked, "What about Leo's feelings in all this?" She tried to argue, but Lisette cut her off, trying to get through to her. The girl stated that she should have figured it out, if she really knew Leo. Clarice stood there stunned, as Lisette implied someone else already had his heart. A weird lump formed in her throat, a mix of hurt and anger. She'd been with him since they were kids, practically knew his family's land like the back of her hand. She'd prayed for the prosperity of those lands ever since she got her powers. Clarice had worked her tail off to get recognized and called to service by the church. She stood up and screamed, saying she did it all for Leo. She asked, desperate, if she deserved nothing in return. Lisette smiled and said everyone knows and appreciates what she's done. She pointed out that she wasn't doing it for anyone else, just for him. Lisette reminded her, there are things in this world she'll never have. She understood it was painful to admit, but that's just how it is. Looks like this was the first time Clarice had talked to someone who could shatter her fantasies. Lisette patted her and said Leo doesn't owe it to her to fix her problems. She left, throwing out that he'd finally found someone he truly loved. Clarice looked down at the floor, feeling a surge of pure rage. She was green with envy, knowing Sophie hadn't done a damn thing to deserve it. That night, Leo went to the ball, and she and Lady Lisette were stuck here. She just knew he was spending time with Lady Sophia. Clarice was jealous, remembering he never defended her like that. These thoughts fueled her rage, pushing her to work even harder. The priests praised her for her tireless dedication. The girl basked in the glow of their flattering words. The young men were thrilled with how kindly she treated them. She couldn't help but remember when Sophie called Leo her friend. Clarice figured Leo's feelings might not be returned. She was secretly hoping he'd back off if she turned him down. Meanwhile, Adam was happily chowing down on tomatoes, which he used to hate. Leo couldn't stop smiling as long as he was around this family. Sophie realized for the first time just how attached Adam had become to Leo. You could see it in his happy grin, always running to the guy. She knew she shouldn't push him away as much as she had been. Sophie decided to check how far along they were in the novel's storyline. Leo's eyes darted around when she asked about his engagement to Clarice. She couldn't help but start remembering the events that happened after the engagement. She was totally caught off guard when he grabbed her hand and apologized. The maids knew exactly what was up when he asked to talk in private. They exchanged glances, sending each other a silent message. The girls dragged Adam into another room, promising him strawberry jello. Sophie was totally lost, wondering where this calm dude was taking her. Before she could even say a word, he had her pinned against the wall. He placed her hand on his chest, staring right into her eyes. She froze, completely stunned, not knowing what the heck was going on. She tried to push him away and tell him to stop, but he wouldn't budge. He kept her pinned and suggested they talk things over calmly. To her surprise, he lifted her hand and pointed out the bruises. Sophie froze, totally stunned, like she couldn't believe all this was about some bruises. The guy gave the bruise a cold look and asked who was responsible for it. He didn't realize that because of his actions, she'd jumped to a completely different conclusion. The woman explained that her husband gave her the bruise at the Queen's party. He did it right when he was trying to slip a ring on her finger. She pulled down her sleeve and explained exactly how it happened. Sophie noticed his mood shift and said her arm didn't hurt at all. Leo said that after something like that, he couldn't even call him a man. Sophie looked away and said he didn't need her. He needed Adam. Leo figured Tristan might have found out about his abilities. Sophie used to think he had no clue about his powers kicking in. They were dead certain he wouldn't quit until Adam was his. This whole thing had them seriously on edge and thinking hard. Their attention shifted when the butler walked into the room. He announced that a clergyman was asking to see Leo. Sophie remembered that he was connected to Clarice's bodyguards. Leo said he'd go out and talk to him right away. They were stoked when they heard their order from the garden store had arrived. That same day, they got started planting flowers in Adam's honor. After a quick chat, Leo hurried back to them to lend a hand. The guy wasn't exactly spilling the tea about what they talked about. Adam grinned like a loon and showed them the flower he'd just planted. Leo smiled and told him he did a bang-up job. Sophie smiled back and couldn't help but think Adam was like that cute little sapling. Adam pointed at another sapling and asked if he was strong and awesome. Sophie laughed and said he was like Sir Lancelot. Leo got flustered and turned away, trying to wipe dirt off his cheek. Adam suddenly found some weird seeds that Leo had ordered. He didn't know anything about them, but still offered to plant them together. Once they were done, Adam started wondering what kind of flowers would grow from them. Leo couldn't give a straight answer and just smiled, taking off his gloves. He told him he'd explain it all when he was older. Adam grinned, all happy, and held out his pinky, like, "Promise?" Leo smiled back, and, all good-natured, hooked their fingers together. No sooner did he get back to Sophie than she hit him with the same question. Leo just calmly sat down next to her and said it was a secret he was going to keep. He said he'd tell her if she promised to ask him for help if she ever got into trouble. The guy knew right away she hadn't told anyone about the bruise. Sophie smiled and said it was her problem, and she didn't want to burden anyone with it. She felt pathetic for getting it, and she didn't want anyone to see it. Leo knew what was behind that smile and touched her hand. He told her he wasn't the only one who wanted her to lean on him. The guy stroked her hand and asked her to remember that. Sophie got visibly flustered, but still promised him she'd keep it in mind. She gave an awkward smile and asked what kind of seeds they were. Leo moved even closer, drawing out his answer on purpose. Sophie suddenly stood up and said she'd find out with Adam. Leo smiled and took her sudden decision in stride. On the way to the house, he couldn't help but wonder how long he'd been living there. Sophie smiled at the thought of him staying with them until May. She did the math and realized they'd been together for almost 6 months. To her surprise, Leo stopped and said he'd be leaving the maiden estate pretty soon. She froze, a whirlwind of emotions hitting her all at once. He looked down, remembering his conversation with the Holy Guard. The guy started by explaining that the Guard was created to protect the Holy Maiden. They wanted Leo to become their commander-in-chief knight. He realized the church was expanding its power and had just made its move. He had a bad feeling a conflict was brewing between the church and the royal family. The Guard handed him an appointment order, signed by the Pope himself. Leo knew that accepting the position would mean he'd sided with the church. This was supposed to give them the edge in the whole mess. After thinking it over, the guy straight up said he had to pass. The Guard asked if he wouldn't do it, even for the sake of St. Claris. Leo locked eyes with him and said his answer was still no way. He still remembered someone swapped Sophie's invite to the ball. He had a bad feeling she was in danger, and he needed to stay put. Leo stated that he still had obligations to the Medine household. The Guard pointed out that Lady Sophie hadn't finalized her divorce yet. He turned around and asked him to spell out exactly what he meant. The guy smirked and said the church recently got a letter from the Grandcourt family. Tristan wrote in it that he wants to nullify the divorce papers. The institution of marriage was completely controlled by the church, so even the king was powerless. If the Pope signs the petition, that document becomes invalid. Leo walked up to the Guard and asked if he understood what he was saying. He felt threatened when the guy offered him a promotion to commander to avoid certain things. The Guard tried to justify himself by saying he was just carrying out the Pope's will. Leo paused for a second and said he'd meet with him himself. He knew he had to do it to protect Sophie and her family. Leo didn't want to explain the reason to her and said he just wanted a change of pace. He couldn't help but think that wanting to stay with her was just him being selfish. Still, he was ready to do whatever it took, anything to protect their happiness. Sophie was prepared for this, since it was in the novel. She sensed something was bothering him and asked if this was what he really wanted. The dude lied, forcing a smile and saying that yeah, it was. She blurted out that Adam might get bummed about it, just like she was. Just then, she spotted Adam running towards them. He excitedly grabbed Leo's hand, like he'd done 1,000,000 times before. The kid grinned, telling them all about how he watered the seeds. Sophie smiled and asked if he'd keep taking care of them. Once he got enough praise, he asked Leo to pick him up. Sophie watched it all calmly, like she wanted to burn this moment into her memory. She was thinking about how they got off on the wrong foot when they first met. Still, thanks to his belief in her, she'd found a loyal and dependable ally. A lot went down, but she got through it all easy enough with him backing her up. That's exactly why she figured it was time for her to get stronger and move forward. She had to do it to protect everyone she cared about, plain and simple. That's why she was trying to take whatever life threw at her with her head held high. Sophie went over to the maids, like she was turning something over in her head. She winked with a smile and asked them to get something ready for her. That evening, Sophie walked out into the hallway, carrying a basket. She just happened to catch Leo the butler lugging around some booze. He didn't realize it was Sophia at first, so he answered her question. She took advantage of his confusion and said she'd handle it from there. Sophia zoomed ahead, saying she had everything under control. As soon as Leo heard the door open, he immediately thanked the butler. He definitely wasn't expecting Sophia to walk in instead of another dude. I think his appearance threw her off her game a little. The guy smirked and said he wasn't always on his best behavior either. Sophia confessed she wanted to talk and asked him to stay. He blushed a little, but he couldn't exactly say no to something he wanted so badly. Before she knew it, he ushered her inside and shut the door quick. The butler saw the whole thing, jaw dropped, face red as a beet. Meanwhile, Sophie took a seat at the table and got out some glasses for drinks. She looked at her hand and thanked him for healing it up for her. Leo said his servants get banged up a lot, so he keeps good medicine around. Sophie complimented him on how well he takes care of his people. For some reason, her words hit him like a ton of bricks. He ate his sandwich lost in thought, with all the gifts still sitting on the table. Sophie smiled, seeing how much he valued his friendships. She looked at the man thoughtfully and realized he really cared about their family. Leo felt her eyes on him and remembered he wanted to talk about Adam. She was surprised her son had told him about the messed up stuff from his childhood. Leo told her not to worry, figuring Adam didn't want to upset her. He got flustered when she thought he was just trying to make her feel better. The woman smiled and told him not to worry about it either. She decided to change the subject and asked him to tell her more about his new job. Leo was taken aback when she asked if he wanted to become one of the guards. Historically, the Medine family has always stood with the royal family. Unlike them, the guards belonged to and served the church. Sophie asked point-blank if that meant they'd end up on opposite sides. Leo confirmed it, adding that he'd become their political rival. After that short sentence, the room went dead silent. Leo said it was necessary to focus on protecting Clarice. She had immense power, which meant neighboring countries were watching her closely. Sophie asked if he personally wanted to sign up for the guard. The man clenched his fists and said that's exactly what he was going to do. Sophie accepted it, since she remembered she was supposed to become his enemy anyway. She still hoped she could avoid ending up a criminal. The woman smiled and said she'd support him all the way. The next day, he had a tough conversation ahead with Lucas. The guy knew right away his buddy was planning to snoop around the church's business. Lucas sighed, totally beat, when he said he was definitely going to take advantage of this chance. He smirked and said it didn't seem like him to go all traitor. Leo closed his eyes and calmly said he was jumping to the wrong conclusions. Lucas suggested he find other ways to help, instead of becoming a holy guard. He was trying to defuse the situation, but Leo wasn't really biting. Leo turned away and said this had nothing to do with Sophie. Lucas froze, shocked, like he was looking at a totally different person. Leo declared that Lucas being in the guard was becoming a problem. The guy clenched his fist and asked if what he was thinking was really true. Leo shot him a look of pure contempt, remembering he was the stronger one. To Leo's surprise, Lucas took the bait and grabbed him by the collar. He just gave him this heavy, disappointed stare. No words needed. Leo calmly caught his hand and returned the look. He thanked him for his help, then said he couldn't let him be a guard anymore. The guy clenched his jaw and walked off, wondering what the hell just happened. He promised, with pure venom in his voice, to get out of his hair for good. Lucas left, completely missing the sadness that washed over Leo's face. The next day, he went to see a big shot in the church. He gave a respectful bow and thanked them for taking him in. Sitting across from him was Papa Marco, who always looked like a stand-up priest. Even so, all he really cared about was pushing his political agenda. Leo announced he was back with an answer to their recent offer. The Pope smiled smugly, hoping he'd finally come around. To his surprise, Leo closed his eyes and said that wasn't the case. After a short pause, he said he wanted to turn down the job. The moment he refused, the priest's expression did a total 180. He put on this overly sad face, like he was trying to process the rejection. Leo got wary when he suddenly brought up his marriage to the saint. He flat out asked why he was still hesitating and turning down such an honor. Marco was like some puppet master when he started talking about Leo's dad's position. He knew right away his old man was mixed up in this engagement thing. The guy couldn't help but wonder if his father was getting threatened too. Marco added that his dad was a close and valued friend of the church. After another one of Marco's power plays, Leo said he wanted a position just as prestigious. He got specific, saying he wanted to be Clarice's protector. It came out so strong that Marco's dad froze. He was hesitant at first, but he agreed to give it a shot. Leo stood up, deciding to throw one more request into the mix before he left. He asked them to promise they wouldn't operate in the shadows. He brought up Grandcourt's divorce papers getting shredded as an example. The priest gave a sly grin and said he'd take his request into consideration. He added that he'd keep it in mind for as long as he was serving the church. Leo left the office thinking that even the big guys could play dirty. Still, he was willing to get his hands dirty if it meant protecting the people he cared about. Leo didn't mind being the bad guy, as long as it was just him. Lucas spent the entire next day out on the training grounds. Those words Leo had said kept replaying in his head. He cursed him under his breath, feeling the anger turning into raw power. He didn't know Leo had said all those things on purpose, to push him away. Lucas was going wild on his own guys, trying to work out his rage. He stopped when his opponent yelled out loud that he gave up. Lucas, breathing heavy, wondered if he was really just holding them back. He slumped to the floor and said sadly that this was a total screw-up. His opponent was surprised by what he said, since he'd actually won. Lucas gave a twisted smirk and said he'd only won this one fight. He tilted his head back, lost in thought, watching the clouds drift by. After a moment, he got up and decided to play along with it. Meanwhile, Sophie finally managed to meet up with Marianne. The girl was thrilled to finally see her friend. She looked like an excited puppy spotting a treat. Sophie knew right away she was dying to hear all the juicy details about her and Leo. She was surprised to hear that he just rescued her at the ball that day. Sophie held her breath when Marianne brought up some other intel. Apparently, she'd heard somewhere that Sophie and Leo had spent the night together. The woman froze, shocked, not believing that such rumors were going around about them. She couldn't even imagine anything like that happening between them. Sophie fiercely shouted, denying that any relationship like that was even possible. Marianne told her not to be embarrassed, like she didn't believe a word she was saying. She slumped back, bummed, realizing she wasn't gonna get to dish about the romance. Sophie looked at her thoughtful friend, surprised. Marianne looked like she was still holding back some doubts. Sophie decided to find out why she hadn't touched the snacks. Before starting the conversation, she asked for all the plates to be cleared from the table. After just a couple of minutes, Sophie finally understood what was going on. Turns out, her husband bought her a dress as a gift, but he got the wrong size. Because of that, Marianne decided she needed to go on a diet. Sophie suggested getting the dress altered, but they wouldn't make it in time for the anniversary. Marianne was ready to make sacrifices for that kind of happiness. Still, what really bummed her out was that the dress didn't fit around the waist. Sophie kinda got how tough it was for her to ditch the sweets. Mariana was torn, like between a rock and a hard place, but her love for looking good won out. Sophie tried to be there for her friend, knowing exactly what she was going through. Then it hit her. She could whip up some treats that were totally diet-friendly. She hustled Mariana to the kitchen, ready to get down to business. The girl was blown away by how well Sophie had adapted. She grabbed a whisk, looking thoughtful, and asked if she could lend a hand. Sophie grinned and asked her to help with the frosting. She kept trying to reassure her that this dessert was totally guilt-free. Sophie suggested swapping out everything, from the milk to the nuts. This was supposed to cut calories and make you feel full. After hashing out all the details, they finally got down to business. The dish smelled so good, even Adam came running. In the end, they had custard pastries all over the table. Marianne was stoked that they'd made them themselves. Sophie added that they were super healthy, then told her to dig in. Her friend started to sweat a little, 'cause she saw the sugar they added. The second she decided to try a bite, a smile spread across her face. Sophie was happy to see her friend smiling again, not all bummed out. Something this simple just shows how much they care about each other. Marianne admitted she hadn't felt this good in ages. She was surprised when she saw Sophie packing up some sweets for her to take home. The woman said her diet should be one where she could eat and still lose weight. Marianne used to think dieting was all about deprivation. Sophie asked her to give the pastries to her husband and offered to tailor a dress for her. She winked and added that her husband definitely loved her just the way she was. Marianne sincerely thanked Sophie for her kindness today. A few days later, she got a letter from her thrilled friend. Marianne confessed that she'd been struggling to cook healthy food. She finally told her husband about her worries, and he was super supportive. He said he'd love her no matter what, and offered to get her a new dress made. Sophie smiled, reading the line about her coming back soon. She was happy that her knowledge had actually come in handy. The woman put down Mariana's letter and drifted off into her own thoughts. From afar, Lucas watched Sophie, who seemed incredibly lost in thought. He decided to just ask her straight up if something was bothering her. Sophie looked up and saw Lucas's familiar smile. He winked playfully and asked if there was anything he could do to help. Sophie just waved her hand, not really needing any special support. She suddenly remembered how he'd brought her sweets not too long ago. The woman smiled, but decided to bring up one thing. She gave the guy a sly look and asked if she could borrow him for a bit. Sophie remembered their old deal when he promised to go shopping with her. Lucas just smiled calmly and agreed to hang out with her. He stood in front of the woman and gave a polite bow. They were gonna bring Adam, who didn't get why Leo wasn't with them. Both Lucas and Sophie still had no idea what to tell him about that. The woman repeated that he was working and couldn't play all the time. Adam got bummed and reminded her that he used to play with him all the time. Sophie started getting anxious because she couldn't figure out how to calm him down. She gave him a smile and asked if he liked Sir Leo. Sophie figured everyone wanted to hang out with him, that they all loved him. Adam concluded, "You can't spend all your time with just one person." Sophie didn't know what to say and just went quiet, feeling awkward. Lucas stepped in, drawing attention to himself, and called himself a close friend of Leo's. He proudly folded his arms and said they'd worked together for years and become buddies. The guy tactfully left out the part about how they'd had their share of disagreements during that time. Adam asked again if Sir Lotharingia was actually at work. Lucas grinned and said they were in it together, protecting this country. He added that he had the day off, so he was just protecting them. Looks like Adam wasn't really feeling Lucas, which is why he turned away. He scowled and said that he's the one who protects Mom. Lucas didn't even try to argue and decided to go with them downtown. He was surprised when the kid tried to race ahead of him, like they were competing. He smiled and gallantly offered his hand to his mom. Sophie smiled and decided to accept his chivalrous gesture. He gave Lucas a pointed look, like he was saying, "I'm the boss here." The guy watched them walk away and realized Adam's got a good sense about things. After a while, they finally ended up in a place full of weird stuff. Adam got excited when he finally found a possible gift. Lucas tried to point towards the girls' gift section, but Sophie had another idea. She explained that she wanted to pick up a couple of gifts before her visit. Sophie was about to visit the Forster household, headed by the eldest son. The family patriarch and his wife had passed away from illness just a few years ago. The late Viscountess was a friend of Sophie's mother, and her eldest daughter works as their maid. Kate was involved in the letter switch incident and seemed pretty shady. Sophie didn't have solid proof, but she was dead certain about it. Lucas decided to suggest a gift option for the Forster daughters. He showed her a book that could be a good gift for Lady Lena. She was sick and couldn't leave her room, but she loved novels. Sophie was genuinely grateful for the info and the help. Lucas admitted he didn't know anything more than what he'd already said. The woman asked him if he wasn't worried about sharing so freely with her. He leaned in close and said slyly that she had nothing to worry about. The move felt so intimate, it even surprised the maid. Sophie said she'd definitely repay him if they liked the gift. Lucas closed his eyes and hoped she'd already paid him back in advance. He suggested she take him along when she went to the Forster family. Sophie narrowed her eyes and asked what he stood to gain from that. Lucas answered with a smirk that he just wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. Adam could read his mind. All he cared about was reaching his goal. He immediately ran up to Sophie and flat out said he was going with them. Lucas offered to ride together, saying he already had a carriage ready. Sophie accepted his offer, which made his grin even wider. Despite trying to act all nice, you could see he was just looking for an angle. That just made Adam even more suspicious of this weird helper. A few days later, they finally paid a visit to the Forsters' place. Kate greeted the group and thanked them for coming. She smiled when her eyes landed on the knight, Lucas. Sophie thanked her for having them and learned that Kate was currently filling in for her brother. She thanked them for the gifts too and told them to make themselves at home. Adam happened to notice something behind Kate. He spotted a little girl, who had to be Lena. The second their eyes met, the girl bolted. Adam glanced around, like he was looking for someone to back him up. Sophie decided to ask about the girl, hoping she and Adam could meet. Kate forced a smile and said her sister barely ever leaves her room. Sophie looked over at Adam and said, "You can dig in, by the way." Kate watched the boy closely, imagining Lena in his place. She smiled brightly, offering Adam more treats. The kid thanked the nice lady and let her wipe off the crumbs. Kate couldn't help but remember trying to wipe crumbs off her sister. The girl recoiled in fear, telling her to keep her hands to herself. Lucas noticed her hesitation and asked if everything was all right. Kate asked if they were always this touchy-feely with each other. The girl confessed that she remembered all the bad rumors about Sophie. She never thought someone could change that much. In all her time working here, she never actually got to meet Sophie. She said thoughtfully that she'd heard rumors about the mom and son having issues. Lucas calmly suggested she just ask her about it directly. He decided to clear the air, and that got Sophie's attention. Kate immediately got flustered, like she was afraid to ask the big question. She admitted she'd heard Adam was having a tough time adjusting to the noble life. The girl looked away and asked why they were laughing so carefree. As soon as she finished, the room went dead silent. Sophie calmly stroked her son's head and whispered some encouraging words. After that, his anxiety melted away into a sweet, innocent smile. Kate was even more surprised, like she'd expected a totally different reaction. Sophie asked Lucas to keep an eye on Adam for her. The guy readily agreed when she added that she wanted to discuss it privately. The woman calmly sipped her tea until they were alone. She set the cup down and repeated Kate's weird question. Sophie smiled and said just Adam's existence made her happy. Kate mentioned that without the Duke's support, Adam would have a tough time. Sophie politely thanked her, saying that's just their problem to deal with. She straight up asked if she was trying to hook up her sister with her son. The woman was getting close to the truth, but Kate denied it. Sophie admitted she was still managing to smile because of her family's support. She added that's why she wants to keep protecting her family. Kate definitely wasn't expecting such a wise answer. Sophie added that she wanted something similar for the Forster family too. She reached out her hand and asked me to be sure to share it with her. The woman smiled and promised to give them her full support. No questions asked. Her words sounded so generous that Kate froze, completely stunned. She realized that Sophie still considered herself part of the Medine family. Kate tried to point out that Sophie had teamed up with the Grandcourt family. Before she could finish, the woman cut her off, saying sternly that was out of the question. Kate got spooked when she met the woman's hard stare. She was afraid she'd be exposed and made to pay the price. The girl never imagined that Sophie might have figured out she was involved in the setup. She jumped up like a rocket, started begging for forgiveness, and then just bolted. That freaked Sophie out, because she had no clue why she was acting so weird. Meanwhile, Lucas and Adam just happened to catch someone screaming. They saw a maid secretly peeking through a doorway. Adam walked up to the door and slipped a toy he found under it. Next thing he knew, the girl they were hiding was right there in front of him. Adam apologized, saying he just wanted to bring the toys to the room. He noticed the girl wasn't saying anything, and then he saw the cuts on her arms. The kid was shocked and didn't know how to ask about it without making things worse. The girl looked at him with these sad eyes, like she was about to burst into tears. Lena got pissed and asked him if he had a problem with her. She started calling herself trash, but he just smiled and handed her a book. Lena was blown away that he didn't think she was disgusting. Lucas decided to jump in and introduce himself and Adam. Adam smiled and held out the toys when Lucas explained why they were there. The girl turned around, suspicious, and said she didn't want them anymore. She thought she was worthless, dirty, and damaged goods. Adam was surprised, because he thought she really treasured those bears. Lena sadly said that they didn't mean anything to her. Even though she said that, Adam still put them right back in their spots. Adam grinned and said they were a perfect fit for them. Lena couldn't help but imagine them being happy to finally have a place of their own. The girl awkwardly looked away and thanked him for his help. She was surprised that Adam didn't seem to care about her scars at all. She wondered when was the last time she'd felt this relaxed talking to someone. She nervously covered her face with the book and started talking about the story. Adam confessed he couldn't read and had no idea what it was about. Lena smiled and decided to offer to read it together with him. Lucas watched with a smile as one kid managed to capture the girl's heart. After that, they sat on the couch, and Lena started reading the book to him. She was also breaking down the lines the kid didn't get. Adam grinned and glanced at the window, like he was picturing something. Lena smiled back calmly and kept reading the page. She was telling him about a dragon that gave a kid a treasure map. Hearing about the adventure, Adam jumped up and ran to the window. He spotted a weird envelope and asked what it was. He was over the moon when he realized it was a treasure map. Lena never imagined the story in the book would come to life. Adam was surprised when she said her older sister wouldn't let her leave the room. Kate told her not to cause any trouble for the guests. Adam was surprised, saying she wasn't causing him any trouble at all. Lena blushed, thinking maybe she really could go outside. The kid took that as a sign and went off on his treasure hunt. The kids hit the kitchen like a couple of little adventurers. Adam stated confidently that they needed supplies for their journey. The men smiled and started packing a basket for them. He handed him a whole basket of fruit and asked him to look after Lena. After that, they stepped into the hallway and bumped right into the maids. Adam noticed Lena was shyly hiding her face behind the map. The kid decided to take charge and handed him 2 little pouches. He smirked, telling us to keep our mouths shut about seeing him here. The maids exchanged glances, like they were trying to figure out what was up. After a little back and forth, they smiled and swore they wouldn't breathe a word. After that, they kept running into more servants along the way. Every single person they met was super helpful, pointing them in the right direction. Adam grinned, stoked about what was coming next. His good vibes really helped Lena finally relax and enjoy herself. After searching for what felt like forever, they finally found the marked tree. Adam flopped down, totally beat, and accidentally kicked up a small chest. Lena jumped back, startled, and slammed into the tree behind her. Her happiness turned to straight-up fear when she saw her older sister. Kate grilled the kid, demanding to know what she was doing there. The girl froze solid, totally unable to get a single word out. Kate snidely reminded her that she told her to stay in her room. Lena turned around and spotted Adam standing right behind her. He gave her a gentle smile, telling her she hadn't done anything wrong. It was like he gave Lena a little nudge forward, showing he had her back. After that small gesture, the girl felt like she could stand her ground. She said what Kate wanted to hear, but all she got was a scolding. Lena begged her to stop deciding what's good or bad for her. She said she was done caring about what other people thought of her. Her words hit with so much conviction, they even stunned Lucas and Adam. Kate tried to say she was worried about her, but Lena cut her off. Lena came right out and asked why they hadn't been talking as much. Kate looked away and said nothing like that had happened. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, like she was about to say something she'd been holding in for ages. Her eyes were shining with tears as she asked why Kate threw away their parents' gift. The older sister was surprised she remembered that from when she was so little. Lena explained that she'd been told not to bring it up because she got rid of it. She first heard about it way back when she was just a kid. The girl opened up about how much it hurt that Kate had changed so much. Kate broke down crying and begged for forgiveness. I think it was the first time Lena had ever seen her usually so confident sister cry. Adam figured that this thing had to be connected to what they were talking about. Lena's eyes lit up when she saw the familiar chest. Adam opened it up, and they saw wedding rings inside. Lena picked up the chest and realized it belonged to their parents. Kate wiped away her tears and said their names were engraved on the inside. Lena turned the ring around and noticed that her name was actually on it. Kate confessed that she buried the chest along with all her insecurities and fears. She apologized and said she never meant to hurt her. The girl hung her head, feeling like a terrible sister. Sophie snuck up behind them and said that wasn't true at all. She said everything was okay and admitted she'd overheard their conversation. The woman asked if it was true she'd been looking after Lena since she was 14. Kate said she practically raised the girl on her own. Sophie smiled and told her she had to be ready to let Lena go. She added that she shouldn't put all that responsibility just on herself. Kate disagreed, saying Lena was only 4 years old. Sophie smiled and said she thought she was still a kid too. She mentioned that Kate's trying to grow up fast, so she won't be a burden. Sophie smiled and said she's ready to lend a hand. Kate admitted that no one had ever said anything like that to her before. She figured that was just how older sisters were supposed to be. Sophie grinned and said they're going to be hearing a whole different story from now on. Lena gave her older sister a thoughtful look. Looks like Kate caught on to what that look meant. She felt ashamed of everything she'd said before. Sophie smiled and told her they'd already put it behind them. Adam smiled back, relieved, and said everything's cool now. Their support was so overwhelming, it brought Kate to tears. She sank to the ground, feeling like a huge weight had been lifted. Afterwards, Adam and Lena happily headed out for a picnic. Kate looked down, all guilty, and asked them to hear her out. She finally confessed that she'd swapped out Sophie's invitation to the ball. Sophie's face darkened, realizing her suspicions were right all along. Kate said, dead serious, that she'd made a deal with someone. She added that the someone was Sophie's ex-husband. Back then, they desperately needed Lena's meds, so she couldn't say no. The Maiden family was helping, but the price of the medicines skyrocketed. Sophie calmly stated that they should have told them about it. Kate apologized, saying she didn't want to push her luck any further. She figured she should have just followed Tristan's orders. The girl admitted that Sophie had opened her eyes to what was going on. Sophie immediately started wondering about exactly what Tristan had promised her. After that conversation, she peacefully watched the kids playing. Kate explained that even though there was treasure in the chest, the map showed the real stash was somewhere else. Adam perked right up and suggested they go find it ASAP. He confidently grabbed Lena's hand, and they set off on their treasure hunt. As soon as the girls were alone, Sophie decided to clarify one little detail. She said Kate was going to have to face the music for what she did. Kate looked down, all guilty, knowing she had it coming. She was scared stiff, not knowing what kind of punishment she'd get. Then, out of nowhere, Sophie smiled and offered her a job working for her. Those words were so unbelievable, she was totally speechless. Sophie said she'd take her under her wing because of the danger. She added that she'd take care of Lena's medicine in exchange for loyalty. Kate burst into tears at Lady Sophie's kindness. Sophie gently stroked the girl, who suddenly had so much responsibility dumped on her. Meanwhile, The kids stumbled upon a flower bed, hunting for treasure. They couldn't believe the treasure was just a bunch of flowers. Lena figured it was a gardener's map, and the treasure might not even be marked on it. They turned around when they heard a familiar voice calling out. Standing before them was their older brother, who was always MIA with his job. They were stoked to finally see him back home. Franz Forster apologized for not visiting them in so long. He couldn't tell them the reason he'd been gone for so long. Kate asked suspiciously what he'd been up to. The guy confessed he'd been deep diving into the study of medicinal plants. Turns out, he was the one who planted those plants in the garden bed. He grinned, showing them the herb that was supposed to help Lena heal. The girls couldn't believe he'd actually found something like that. He said all that was left was to make the medicine, so they could all get along again. Kate was surprised he'd even noticed the tension between them. The guy blushed and told them something that helped smooth things over. His kind words brought smiles to the sisters' faces. Kate said they'd talked to Lena and realized her illness wasn't the real problem. Her brother was immediately surprised and asked what the real reason was. Sophie said the problem was her affection for her sister and worrying about her health. The brother felt guilty that he'd been away from home for so long. Lena was stoked, thinking things were finally going to start looking up for her. Sophie felt good seeing them so happy and smiling. She was sure everything was going to be all right now, and everyone knew the drill. Adam smirked, mentioning Lena's real prize. He lit up, happy they'd actually found it. The girl gave him a genuine smile, totally grateful. For the first time in forever, the Forster family seemed to have some good vibes going. A few days later, Kate announced she wanted to quit her job. The girl said she wasn't ditching Sophie or anything. The woman smiled and agreed with her well-thought-out decision. Kate said she was only leaving because Lena had a friend like Adam. She flashed them a bright smile and hoped to see them again sometime. The Medine family smiled back, returning the sentiment. They didn't know a familiar man was lurking behind a pillar. Leo smiled, realizing Sophie had foreseen the girl's departure. He was surprised to hear his friend Lucas's familiar voice. He used to think Lucas would just quit the service, but Lucas had gone way further than that. He frowned, thinking it was a complete screw-up. Leo Lotharingia left, realizing this place was never really his to begin with. The next day, Adam sat alone on the playground. We had to pay our respects to Leo and see him off for good. Adam turned away, bummed out, because he didn't want to go say goodbye. Sophie saw he was having a hard time and told him to come if he changed his mind. Meanwhile, Leo was already standing by the carriage that was ready for him. He felt guilty for letting things get so messed up and unfair on his end. It seemed to him like these folks were being way too nice to him, considering. He turned around and saw the woman smiling softly. And the servants. The woman said that even though they were on opposite sides, their connection wouldn't be broken. She added that Adam didn't want to see him off and stayed home. Right after that, she handed him a basket of food for the road. Leo thanked the cook for all the care and food he'd been preparing. The guy confessed that he wasn't the one who made it. It was Lady Sophie. Leo was floored, totally shocked when he realized she was behind it. She called it a thank you for how often he'd bailed them out. She insisted he take it and promised it'd be delicious. Leo smiled warmly and said he'd definitely dig in. After that, the girl said goodbye, giving him a final wave. Even though he was gone, she was still riding a wave of good vibes. Adam decided to say goodbye to the guy too, but he was already too late. He burst into tears when he realized Sir Lotharingia had already left. Sophie smiled calmly and said he'd see him again. Leo shivered when he felt the gentle touch of her hand. He clung to his mom and cried like he'd lost someone important. Meanwhile, with every meter, Leo felt worse and worse. Turns out the road was blocked, and they had to take a detour. The man took the whole thing in stride. No big deal. They rerouted through the city where the festival used to be held. He couldn't help but remember Sophie feeding him soup right there. The man suddenly realized he couldn't actually taste anything. His carriage passed a store that had lost its vibrant colors. He remembered them picking flowers in it for Master Adam. All those past memories came crashing down on him like an avalanche. Because of those memories, he approached the academy with a smile on his face. He realized that since then, he could even stomach those damn tomatoes. The next moment, the carriage hit a bump, and the basket went flying. Leo managed to grab what was made with love at the last second. He calmly thought about how he was already starting to get hungry. After that, the guy pulled out the sandwiches the girl had made. He started eating and found that the food was incredibly delicious. Leo lifted the cloth and found a letter hidden at the bottom of the basket. Sophie wrote that she's praying for his happiness and included that brooch. Just 3 words made Leo feel like his heart was about to break in two. The coachman apologized for the long ride and asked if he enjoyed the scenery. Leo replied darkly that it was a bit much, actually. That same day, he took up his duties as Clarice's protector. All the girls were buzzing about how good he looked in that knight's uniform. They were also gushing over how cute Clarice looked. The girls held their breath when they saw her trip. Leo Lethargia saved her from falling with lightning reflexes. He calmly set her back on her feet, which made her smile. This scene was straight out of a movie, and everyone was eating it up. Clarice said even if she wasn't paying attention, he'd still save her. The guy just calmly said it was his nightly duty. Clarice was stoked that he was so dedicated to protecting her. She mentioned she's planning a trip to the city next week. The guy nodded coolly and said he'd go with her. She was thrilled he was indulging her every whim. The way they were interacting, you'd think they were a couple head over heels. She was over the moon, thinking Leo came back just for her. After returning to Altrua Academy, Leo got his own private room. Dude was a total head-turner for all the nights there. Because of that, he couldn't catch a break anywhere. Clarice was seriously prepping for their upcoming trip into town. She froze, totally overhearing a conversation between 3 chicks. The girl greeted them with a smile, stoked to join in. She noticed one of the girls was holding a matching ciel. Turns out she got it from her adoring fiancé. Clarissa stopped dead when the girl said she was getting one too. Leo showed up in the doorway, reminding her he told her to wait in his room. He looked so freaking awesome, everyone just held their breath. She practically kicked him out of the room, all excited to leave. On their walk, they just happened to wander into a cafe. Clarice smiled and told him how long she'd wanted to check this place out. She guessed he looked tired because of all his responsibilities. He was about to lay down the law, but she cut him off and dragged him inside. Next thing he knew, they were in a place overflowing with pink pastries. Clarice was totally digging this fluffy marshmallow wonderland. Leo just calmly agreed that, yeah, the food was actually pretty good. Clarice grinned, not realizing she had some cream on her cheek. Leo pointed it out, but she told him she'd get it herself. The guy had no choice but to wipe her face with his handkerchief. Clarice gave him a sweet smile, blushing at the thoughtful move. She started freaking out inside when she saw Sophie walking by. The girl clenched her fists, like she thought it was totally unfair. She told Leo they should ditch this place and check out somewhere else, quick. Clarice managed to drag him away before he even saw Sophie. The girl glanced around all sneaky-like and bolted out of the fancy cafe. Leo hurried after her, telling her again not to walk alone. A couple of minutes later, they were on the shore of a clear blue sea. Clarice smiled and started talking about how beautiful the sea is in winter. Leo scanned the area, lost in thought, like he couldn't even relax here. The girl finally realized how chilly it was by the sea and shivered. Luckily for her, Leo was a gentleman and draped his coat over her shoulders. He pointed out, not unkindly, that she'd always been sensitive to the cold. She didn't care about his sharp tone or the little digs he made anymore. She glanced down and stumbled upon a lucky find. Clarice grinned and showed him the legendary lover's seashell. Rumor had it, if 2 people wore these, they'd be together forever. Clarice told him the story, smiling as she held out her hands. She decided to just come out and say she was giving him his half of the pair. Leo was caught off guard and reminded her that she was the one who found him. She added that she wanted him to give half of that thing to her when it finally showed up in his life. Clarice was hoping he'd give it to her, since she was the closest person to him. She froze, waiting for his answer. But Leo's attention was elsewhere. He glanced toward the other side of the beach, like he suspected something. The knight grabbed Clarice's hand and dragged her towards what he'd spotted. He explained that something had just clicked in his head and asked her to come with him. A few yards later, he found Adam hiding behind a rock. He was totally shocked to see the kid all alone. He confessed that he'd run here to say goodbye. He pointed to his knees, scraped raw and bloody, his voice full of sorrow. Leo kept his emotions in check, saying this wasn't the place for childish games. Adam looked at the man, shocked, not believing how cold he'd become. Leo Lorraine ordered him to return to the mansion, and then just walked off. Adam stayed sitting on the sand, alone, like he couldn't process what he'd just heard. Just then, Sophie and Lucas, who he'd run away from, caught up to him. Only then did Sophie realize they'd ended up in the same place as Leo and Clarice. The man turned around and said he wanted to tell her something. Sophie froze, waiting for whatever bombshell the man was about to drop. Leo declared he wanted absolutely nothing more to do with them. It hit her so hard, she just froze, completely stunned. After that, he said goodbye, practically dragging Clarice away. He was trying to get out of there ASAP, just to avoid looking her in the eye. Right after that, they went back to the academy where they lived. Clarice wanted to say goodbye, but he suddenly stopped her. The guy grimly held out his hand and said he couldn't accept this. Clarice looked closely at his palm, where the matching soul shard was. He pressed it into her hand, telling her to share it with someone she cared about. Without thinking twice, she took it and decided to confess her feelings. She dramatically broke the two pieces of the matching soul shard apart. Leo was caught off guard and started to get a bad feeling about what she was planning. She said the person receiving the gift should feel the same way as the person giving it. Clarice told him she wanted him to have the other half of her heart. She confessed that she had feelings for him and wanted to be with him. The guy coldly said he'd remember her intense feelings for him. He told her he couldn't reciprocate because he saw her as a little sister. Clarice replied that she'd wait forever for him to see her as a woman. Leo told her she should spend her time more wisely. He said he had a meeting with the Pope, so someone else would be with him in the morning. The guy coldly told her to get some rest in the meantime. Clarice stared at the broken shell, feeling a gaping hole open up in her chest. Her hands froze in the air, and all she could think was, why did it have to be this way? The next morning, she headed to the holy service again. She tried to focus, but the dark circles under her eyes screamed, "Sleepless night." The girl was so strung out that she actually fainted. The priest caught her just in time, before she hit the floor. He stood there with her in his arms, trying to figure out what the heck was going on. He gently carried her to a couch, where she finally blinked awake. The girl looked up, surprised at who'd saved her from a nasty bump. Standing next to her was Zion Danzel, a cardinal of the Holy Church. She tried to get up, but he suggested she rest after praying. He added that her being there was a light for all of them. The guy decided to ask what was making her so down all of a sudden. Clarice confessed that the guy she liked had rejected her feelings. Zion smiled and said she was no saint herself. The girl explained that Leo had distanced himself from everyone else and come to her. She broke down and admitted that was the only reason she thought he'd chosen her. Before her tears could even fall, Zion gently wiped her eyes. He told her not to worry, figuring Leo saw something special in her too. Clarice didn't get it, since Leo had turned her down. Zion called it love, the way Leo valued her above everyone else. He gave her hope, telling her she was giving up way too easily. The cardinal gently squeezed her hand and promised she could do it. The next day, Leo Lothringen ran into a familiar face. Standing before him was Lady Kate Forster, a new student at the academy. She smiled and confessed she came back because of Lady Sophia. She put in her resignation, and they offered to let her come back to school. The knight smiled and said that sounded just like her. She secretly hoped her thoughts about Leo and Sophie were true. She kept thinking about it until she spotted his new companion. Kate got a bad vibe from that girl right away. Meanwhile, Tristan Grandcourt was meeting his partner in a back alley. He asked the guy if he was back to settle up. Tristan asked when he could finally bring the two of them in. The man promised he'd bring Adam real soon. He asked if Adam had some special power they were hiding. Tristan got pissed and demanded to know how he found out. He told him not to worry and promised he wouldn't blow his cover. He added that he'd entered the charity tournament. It's supposed to be between the Royal Guard and the Order of Holy Knights. Technically, he was against the church that Grand Duke was buddy-buddy with. Even so, he said he wanted to be Tristan's right-hand man. Tristan smirked and asked if he'd sell out just to get ahead. He didn't wait for an answer, just got up and said they'd talk later. The guy added that he should keep playing his part so nobody suspects a thing. He raised his lamp, revealing Lucas Guida's face in the light. The next day, Adam was out in the garden, sketching like always. Sophie watched him work on the painting, totally fascinated. The kid looked away, lost in thought, like he was trying to remember something. Lucas smiled, commenting that the trees still hadn't budded yet. Adam agreed and showed off his drawings, the ones he makes every single day. Sophie was super stoked, checking out her little dude's masterpieces. She flipped through the pages, one after another, while Adam and Lucas were busy birdwatching. That's when she stumbled on a picture of her, him, and Leo. She couldn't help but flash back to that thing that happened, the one Adam never talked about. It was the first time it hit her. that maybe something had shifted inside him. Her eyes went wide when she remembered him holding Clarice's hand. Adam got her attention and asked for the sketchbook back so he could draw a bird. He stared thoughtfully at the branch, like he was hunting for his next muse. Sophie decided to thank Lucas for hanging out with him so much. She politely asked if he didn't have anything better to do. He told her he was deep in training for the upcoming tournament. Turns out, this competition only happens once every 3 years. Knights battle it out in swordsmanship, right in front of the king himself. Sophie instantly remembered that this event was in the novel. Lucas recalled that Leo has a seriously tough opponent in the tournament. Sophie backed him up, saying it all depends on the fighting style. She asked if he wanted her help to pull out a win. Looks like she finally managed to pique his interest and get him hooked. He couldn't believe she could be of any help against a guy like that. Sophie thanked him as he curtly raised his hand. He smirked and said he'd prove he was the best, fair and square. The woman knew he'd refused, so she had a lot to think about before the tournament kicked off. Adam was painting so hard, he actually crashed early. Sophie walked past the door, wondering when her folks would be back. She tucked Adam into bed, all the while thinking about the start of ball season. She stepped away from the bed and just happened to spot a letter on the desk. It said they couldn't make it back, and she needed to head to the salon. She wanted to spend more time with her son, but now she had stuff to do. She had to solidify her standing in society for his sake. That's exactly why she headed to the big gala. She showed up in a killer red dress and greeted all the ladies. Marchioness Margarita Dubois immediately returned the greeting. She led Sophia over to the nearest couch, where the other women were sitting. Sophia started to worry if she knew enough about the local literature to keep up. She froze when everyone started talking about Adele's romance novel. The woman instantly remembered the cover of that popular book. Adele was a high society woman who fell for a commoner. That forbidden love angle really got to these sophisticated women. They were saying Soireau lacked proper upbringing, which explained his flightiness. One of the ladies asked Sophie what she thought about their love. Sophie just replied that, over time, your loved one's flaws become precious. The ladies immediately praised her philosophical take, full of kindness. Unlike them, there was one who didn't agree with her. Sophie looked at her face and remembered it was Deborah. She quoted a line about how his flaws caused her suffering. Deborah asked if she thought a partner's infidelity was love. Sophie was amazed at how many different interpretations there could be. She didn't say a word and just kept watching Deborah. The girl venomously spat out that not all couples who marry for love live happily ever after. She said that this whole idea of love everyone's talking about just doesn't ring true. Sophie called Deborah out for trying to bring someone down with her garbage opinions. Then she rattled off a bunch of reasons why Deborah was completely wrong. She smiled and suggested that love can be different for everyone. Lizette backed her up, adding that sticking your nose in other people's relationships is just low. The moment she showed up, the other ladies started squealing with excitement. The second lady explained that Lizette is Leo's older sister. Lizette remembered that in the novel, Soir saved Adele from some thugs. That's what sparked their fiery and passionate romance. She read a line that said he was absolutely captivating on stage. Sophie snuck up behind Deborah and nailed the next line of the poem. She pointed out we're talking literature here, not throwing shade. Deborah felt completely crushed and humiliated in that instant. She bit her lip hard, totally defeated, and stormed off. Lizette turned around and saw just how worked up Deborah was. After that little spat, Lizette realized Sophie was someone with brains. She looked at her and figured Sophie was the one she could trust with that story. Lizette decided to seal their awesome first meeting with a glass of bubbly. It felt like they'd known each other forever, even though they'd just met. Lizette thought Deborah was way out of line, saying Sophie shouldn't talk about love. The woman asked if she'd really stood up for her just because of that. Sophie knew she looked out of place in this crowd, but she didn't give a damn. Lizette gazed at the stars and confessed she wished she could be more like her. She looked her in the eye and said that's exactly why she wanted to talk. Some time had passed since then, but Sophie was still thinking about that conversation. Lizette was having doubts about Leo's actions and asked for help figuring things out. It seemed she had no idea that Sophie was just as lost as she was. She doubted he'd even talk to her after what went down. She was so lost in thought, she didn't even notice her parents coming back. The woman looked up and finally saw her parents. They greeted each other with huge smiles, happy to be reunited after so long. Sophie cut to the chase and asked if they'd been called up for the upcoming tournament. Turns out, Olivier had to personally escort a guest to it. Sophie's mom chimed in, saying he used to compete in it every single year. He modestly admitted he was pretty decent at fencing back in the day. The woman beamed and pulled out an album full of old photos. In them, Olivier was a young and kick-ass knight. Adam was blown away by how cool his grandpa looked. Back then, he had a whole crowd of girls lining up, hoping to get with him. Sophie's mom said she bent over backwards just to get him to notice her. Olivier wrapped his arm around his wife, and they both broke into smiles. Sophie watched, happy to see the tenderness still there between them. They decided to sit down on the couch by the cozy fireplace. The woman smiled and told her how highly the Marquise Dubois had spoken of her. Sophie looked down and asked if she really thought she'd screw things up. She glanced at a photograph where she looked like a completely different person. The woman chuckled warmly and said she never thought she was just stubborn. She believed her daughter had always been someone who stood up for what she believed in. Sophie's mother gently touched her forehead to hers and promised that her true self would be seen. She added that the Grandcours were conservative, which was why she was worried. They vanished after the wedding, only resurfacing when Sophie begged to come back. The woman praised her for handling everything like a champ. Sophie felt a touch on her face, brimming with support. Her parents' love genuinely warmed her and made her happy. She realized she already had everything she needed and wouldn't dare ask for anything more. Despite that, she still had these weird feelings nagging at her. The whole Leo thing left this strange emptiness in her heart, like she was drowning. All this stuff just made her want to unwind, you know? She decided to hit a bar and throw back a few, something she hadn't done in ages. Sophie pulled on her hat and felt like she was sneaking out of the castle. The woman was casually sipping her cocktail when she heard a familiar voice. Lucas gave her a knowing look and asked if he could join her. Sophie self-consciously hid behind her hat and asked how he recognized her. Lucas immediately pointed out her family's carriage parked outside. He said it was a surprise to see her drinking alone. Turns out, her mom was the one who pushed her out for some alone time. She practically kicked Sophie out the door, volunteering to babysit Adam. The woman sighed wearily as Leo suddenly popped into her head. Just as that empty feeling hit her again, she drained her glass. She'd already knocked back a whole line of cocktails that evening. She drank until she was completely out of it. The woman got up and said she had to go. Lucas just smirked and told her to stick around. He suddenly realized she was always looking out for everyone but herself. Sophie pushed back, saying she was actually thinking about some private stuff. She waved a finger and said she had been, until he interrupted. Lucas asked her to let him make it up to her by listening. At first, Sophie was gonna pass, but then an idea popped into her head. She practically jumped at Lucas, saying she actually wanted to ask him something. The woman wagged a finger at him and asked if he was hiding anything from her. She figured he was keeping secrets because he didn't trust her. Lucas looked away, all thoughtful, and said it was actually the opposite. Sophie said she wanted to help him, but she couldn't without more info. She looked right at him and asked what she could do to earn his trust. Her words sounded so damn genuine. Lucas just froze. He blushed and asked her to back up a little. The guy said he just didn't want to drag her into his mess. The woman paused, thinking, and asked if that's what he really thought of himself. Lucas meant it about all of them, but he wasn't about to admit it. Sophie said it wasn't surprising that nobody wanted to spill their guts to her. He didn't mean to call her a villain, but she was already lost in her own head. Sophie stood up, all confidence, and declared she was going to trash that bad rep of hers. She laughed and told him to spill if he ever even thought about it again. Lucas went red, but still agreed to her drunken bargain. Sophie paid for her drink and told him he was banned from the Medine estate. She decided she wouldn't try to squeeze anything out of him against his will anymore. On the way to the carriage, she remembered Leo acting different the last time they met. He had this dark vibe that day, and he kept looking around like he was expecting something. She twirled a lock of hair around her finger, wondering what could have happened to him. Sophie smirked, all sly, and decided it was her turn to help him out. Meanwhile, Lucas was stuck on the fact that she wasn't seeing him in her eyes. She was seeing Leo. He remembered that burning look she gave him, staring right into his soul. Lucas felt a sharp pang of envy for his buddy, plain as day. He took a breath and decided he seriously needed to get over it. The guy dropped some coins on the table and reminded himself he had a destiny to fulfill. A couple of days later, the grand opening of the tournament finally kicked off. Both Sophie and Adam were blown away by how huge the whole thing was. Lucas showed them the VIP seats he'd scored, with the best view in the house. Adam was in sugar heaven with all the treats they had. Sophie immediately started worrying that her parents might be stuck way in the back. She lowered her gaze thoughtfully, reminding me that now's not the time to let our guard down. In the novel, this tournament is where everything changes. Leo's victory is what drove a wedge between the crown and the church. Before she could even remember why, Lucas grabbed her attention. She glanced at the guy and remembered that Leo's gonna off him in the finals. In the story, they were enemies because of the Holy Lady Clarissa. Blinded by hate, Lucas decided to use his privilege to take Leo out. Sophia pushed him down that road because she couldn't stand the Holy Lady's popularity. Still, she felt a little better, knowing she wasn't that Sophia anymore. She turned away, feeling ashamed, and decided she wouldn't do anything like that. Besides all that, she remembered Lucas never showed any interest in Clarice. She glanced at him, wondering if maybe she was wrong about that. She figured there had to be another reason for the beef. She thought she was finally connecting with Leo, but he just iced her out. She felt like some unseen force was keeping her stuck inside the story. Sophie wasn't giving up, though. She was sure she could change the ending. Adam scanned the stands, looking for his grandpa and the others, deep in thought. His eyes kept searching until he spotted a familiar figure. Adam squinted, focusing on a guy who looked a lot like Leo. He asked Sophie if they could head down and take a closer look. They thanked Lucas for escorting them and wished him luck in the tournament. The guy grinned and offered to guide them so they wouldn't get lost in the crowd. Adam strode confidently toward where Leo was supposed to be. He was ready to check every nook and cranny, just to find that one guy. Sophie and Lucas exchanged knowing glances, like they were trying to figure out who he was looking for. The woman smiled and suggested he take a walk while he had the chance. The next second, they covered their ears in shock when they heard a muffled explosion. Some people looked up and noticed they'd set off fireworks to celebrate the tournament opening. Everyone was totally caught off guard by the sudden noise. Adam sank to the ground, freaked out when he heard that the Grand Courthouse had set it up. He didn't even get a peep out before they threw a bag over him and snatched him. Sophie scanned the crowd and realized with a jolt of fear that the kid was gone. She started yelling and freaking out, knowing she couldn't find him. Lucas looked around and spotted a guy calmly walking away from the crowd. Something inside him went cold when he saw those little kids' shoes. He told Sophie to get back to where she was and promised he'd find him. Meanwhile, the guys who grabbed Adam were just getting back to their hideout. Lucas stormed in on them, reminding them that he was supposed to handle the job. Tristan gave the guy who was supposed to grab the kid a bored look. He waved his hand and said the objective was complete, so he wasn't needed anymore. Lucas looked at the boy's face and realized they'd knocked him out with something. The knight said he'd be the first suspect, but he could help get Adam back the right way. He mentioned the church was dragging its feet on the divorce just because of Leo. Lucas clenched his fist, cold as ice, and said he could take care of him. That option sounded pretty damn good to Tristan Grandcoeur. Lucas smirked and said that way he could get custody back, no problem. Still, Tristan knew Adam was already in his grasp, and it was just a matter of time. He asked Lucas if he could handle an opponent way out of his league. The man proudly replied he'd been watching him for years in the Royal Guard. Tristan ordered him to do what he had to, just don't get caught by Leo. Lucas, with his silver tongue, actually managed to get the kid back. He headed back with a swagger to the woman he'd been lying to for so long. Just like he told her, Sophie was back at the place they'd prepped for their family. Her face fell when she saw Lucas come back without Adam. He told her everything was cool, and they knew where he was. Sophie cut right to it, asking why he didn't bring him, and brought up that whole fireworks thing. It hit her like a ton of bricks. Tristan was behind it all. She said out loud she'd always had a bad feeling that he'd resort to his old tricks again. Lucas smirked and said he already had a plan to get him back. Sophie's wheels started turning, and she asked if he'd actually seen Tristan. She hinted that there were things he wasn't supposed to know. Sophie asked suspiciously if he was planning to hurt that kid. The second she said that, his face went dark. She wagged her finger and asked if he was being blackmailed. The woman said she didn't believe he was capable of doing something wrong. That just made him feel even worse about himself. He rubbed the back of his neck, exhausted, and said it'd be stupid to keep anything from her. The man put his hand on his heart and promised to tell her everything he knew. Sophie learned that Leo became a holy knight because the cardinal was leaning on him. That explained a lot about why he'd been acting so cold. She was bummed thinking about him having to sacrifice himself like that. Lucas confessed he wanted to get close to Tristan to save Leo. He was trying to figure out Leo's angle and get him to drop the divorce thing. Sophie said he got caught up in their mess by accident and told him to leave it to her. She confidently declared she'd get Adam back herself and then laid down her terms. He said cutting ties with Tristan was just not an option, impossible. The woman coldly asked him how he planned to handle this situation. The man said they could try to fake a poisoning maybe. Sophie laughed, calling it the easiest way to get Leo on their side. Lucas got flustered and said he shouldn't be depending on him. Sophie smiled, calling Lucas a strong and dependable knight. She added that she wanted to do everything she could, like Adam's mother would. Lucas saw the determination in her eyes and knew he couldn't refuse her. He held out a shiny object to her, which visibly surprised Sophie. Lucas explained that it was better for them to be on the safe side. She sincerely thanked him, and as a last request, asked him to make amends with Leo. The man froze in the doorway, but promised he would do it anyway. As soon as Sophie met Tristan, he asked why she had come to see him. He smirked and asked if she missed him or something. The woman decided to play along, smiled, and said it was true. Her smile vanished, replaced by a stern look, as she demanded to know where her son was. Tristan smirked and asked if Adam had suddenly gone missing. Sophie demanded her son back immediately, promising to let the whole thing slide. The man tapped his foot impatiently and said that wasn't gonna cut it. He ordered her to get on her knees and beg him to find Adam. Sophie just rolled her eyes, like she was swatting away a fly. She smiled and said Adam wouldn't be returning to the Grand Court family. Tristan's face twisted with rage, like that was the last thing he wanted to hear. Meanwhile, the tournament was starting to heat up, getting to the part everyone was waiting for. The two main contenders were about to face off in a duel. Lucas went straight on the offensive against his old friend and rival. The guy wanted to settle some personal beef and said he knew what Leo was up to. Leo frowned, asking if all this was about Adam and Sophia. Lucas shot back that he was missing the bigger picture, trying to be a martyr. In the blink of an eye, he was ready to deliver a devastating blow. He grazed Leo's cheek and dropped the bomb. Tristan Grandcourt had snatched Adam. That news threw him for a loop, making him even angrier. Lucas wasn't about to answer why he was still hanging around. Leo figured that as long as Lucas was with Sophia, she and Adam would be safe. The guy replied that he thought watching from the sidelines was enough, but he was dead wrong. Lucas turned to Leo and said he was the only one who could do it. He explained how Adam kept a sketchbook, planning to show it to him someday. He even mentioned how Sophie was hurting because he was keeping her at arm's length. Leo shut it down when Lucas said Sophie felt like she wasn't worthy of his trust. Lucas paused and calmly said he should probably say this in person. He looked him straight in the eye and said his words wouldn't mean anything otherwise. The guy chuckled and added that he'd messed up his strategy for keeping everyone safe. He added that if Leo didn't come back, he'd be free to marry Sophie. The second he said those words, Leo went absolutely ballistic. Meanwhile, Sophie kept fighting for her rights as a mother. The queen walked in, and Tristan was totally screwed. The jerk was clearly freaked out and wanted to know why she was there. She said she came to hear what Adam had to say. She called it completely unacceptable to take a kid against his will. Tristan knew he was trapped and ordered them to bring the kid in. The second the door opened, Adam bolted straight to his mom. Sophia smiled wide, squeezing the kid in a hug. Tristan tried to weasel out of it, saying he was just worried about Sophia handling her responsibilities. The queen said she heard him and suggested they ask Adam himself. She turned right to the kid and asked if he wanted to live with his dad. Adam locked eyes with her, firm, and told her he wasn't interested. He pulled Sophie close, saying he wanted to be with her forever. The queen turned to Tristan, stating that it was his son's choice. The man refused to accept it, and you could see it all over his face. The queen said she was just going with her gut feeling. She also added that Sophie could use the royal heirloom if she ever found herself in a tight spot. Turns out, Lucas had been hiding his royal bloodline. The queen approached the woman and asked if his change in attitude was her doing. Sophie smiled and said he just wanted to save Adam. The woman smiled and sincerely asked her to keep looking after him. Sophie silently thanked him for managing to smooth things over with the king. She spun around the second she heard the screams from the stands. Adam said he wanted to watch the fight and cheer them on. Sophie was all for it. She wanted to make sure they were okay. Little did she know, she was about to witness something that would leave everyone speechless.